Chapter 11, taking the second task serious. The first interesting thing that happened of 2005 was Harry getting assaulted and squeezed nearly to death by a man he'd never seen before. Come here, pup. Sirius Black had been released from St. Mungo's and was finally free to see his godson for the first time in 10 years. Though he had to meet Harry in Hogsmeade as opposed to Hogwarts, which still had Dementors flying around it. Understandably, the man never wanted to come within 1,000 feet of a Dementor again. His godfather brought him to a pub where he checked into a room and sat his godson down. So, I've been hearing all sorts of things about the adventures we've been on for the last year. Not that I disapprove, but what was that about? Harry shrugged. When I first came to the wizarding world, they had books about my adventures too. I don't exactly remember doing those things either. Sirius smirked and continued, and what's this about you dying last year? That's not exactly a joke even I would approve of. Harry shook his head and said, I didn't have any say in that and I don't want to talk about it. Did you like Skeeter's articles? Sirius smiled and said, loved 'em, pup. What did you have in mind for the second task? Can I help? I already finished preparing for that one, but there is something during the task you can do if you want though. I'll go over it with you later. Sirius's smile faltered and silence fell for a few moments. He said, can you forgive me, Harry? I wasn't there for you. Harry waited a few moments before answering back, things don't always go the way you wanted them to. Sirius raised an eyebrow and stated with a smirk, now when did the brat I used to change the diapers of get so wise? Don't tell anyone, but I am secretly a genius. Only 2 of my friends know and Dumbledore suspects, but he hasn't told anyone. A genius, you say? We'll see about that. An hour later and Sirius Black was lying prone on the ground in defeat. He had thought trying to show his godson his animagus form and explaining how he succeeded in only a few years without professional help would convince Harry of his own amazingness. Harry ended up asking 20 or so questions regarding the animagus process, and now Harry was a large, nearly pure white snowy owl. It was a bit surprising that when he looked inside himself to see what his innate animal was, he quickly saw a familiar-looking snowy owl and felt a connection to it. After feeling out the process, he was able to shift his form into this owl. Sirius was very clear that you couldn't choose your animagus, it was something that was already a part of you, and Harry was not disappointed. The snowy owl was pretty much the largest species of owl and a bird of prey, top of the food chain. It was also native to the UK, Europe, and even North America, so it would not be out of place if he was seen flying around. Throw in the symbolism and the pure color and Harry allowed himself to feel more than a little pride at the quality of his inner animal. Sirius was dramatically banging his fist on the ground and called out, okay, you win, I give. You're a genius. The fact that Harry got the animagus perk in advance but didn't know how to use it until now was something he would never speak of. His godfather looked like his ego could use a little deflating. Harry shifted back and began talking with Sirius Black in earnest about whatever he could think of. The reason was simple. When Harry went from that hell of a cupboard to that heaven of his parents' arms, the act of his parents telling him about their lives was almost therapeutic. Sirius Black had just gotten out of his own personal hell of Azkaban, and Harry was now with one of the only 3 people in this world he considered family other than Lupin, who he couldn't find, and his cousin Andromeda. Harry told him about his life with the Dursleys, and only the fact that they had already been confirmed dead stopped Sirius from sending them on their way himself. Harry said he didn't remember what happened that night but showed up a year later in a park with new knowledge and a letter. It was that letter that told him to find out what happened to Sirius, which led to Harry getting the details from the goblins. Several parties tried to stall Sirius' trial through several means, but the goblins had already taken significant measures to prevent their interference beforehand in the week prior to the rat's capture. It was only thanks to that measure his godfather was a free man less than a month later. Sirius was surprised that not only had Harry captured the rat, but had arranged ahead of time for the interference of others. Had Harry simply gifted Pettigrew to the DMLE, Sirius would likely still be in Azkaban. After a few more hours of conversation they had something of a plan, which Harry later brought to Dumbledore, who immediately approved. Sirius would stay in Hogsmeade for the remainder of the school year, and every weekend Harry would be allowed to go to Hogsmeade, where his godfather would secretly train him to the best of his abilities. Dumbledore's smile could not be brighter when Harry asked this of him, and Dumbledore had no problem approving it. This did not constitute assistance from the school, as 3rd years and above were allowed to go anyways, and Harry, only being a first year, was at a disadvantage for not being allowed. Dumbledore even suggested using the path beneath the Whomping Willow to access Hogsmeade so the training could truly be done in secret. Harry figured Dumbledore had been looking for a way to make things up to Harry for some time, but the restrictions of the tournament had prevented many of the ideas he could think of. He couldn't even hire a private tutor for Harry, as paying for it himself or through Hogwarts was still considered assistance. Thankfully, Sirius was in no way a student or staff member of Hogwarts, and had the grounds not been covered in Dementors, Dumbledore would have allowed the man to use the guest quarters at the school. Dumbledore also suspected another reason for Harry's plan. Sirius had been locked away and useless for a full decade. Now he was being given the chance not only to keep in contact with one of the last remnants of his family, but also to feel useful by training Harry himself as the only person who could do so. When Dumbledore saw Sirius during their most recent meeting, the man had the fire of life once more burning in his eyes, something he sorely lacked when he visited the man at St. Mungo's a few weeks prior. Had Dumbledore known the other reason Harry set up this arrangement, he would not have been so pleased. Harry pretty much told Sirius he could memorize several books a week and asked him to bring some from the Black family library each weekend. Sirius wasn't thrilled with returning to his prior home, but he couldn't deny the request. Since Harry also told him the future was looking dangerous, Sirius also felt it would be wise to brush up on his family magics himself. The only part of the meeting that Harry didn't enjoy was Sirius's hysterical laughter when he answered a question that had been on Harry's mind since Sirius obtained his freedom. What are you going to do about your lordship? You have a target on your back since once you die, everything goes to some Death Eater, right? Sirius had a maniacal grin when he said, you mean what am I going to do about that fact that Malfoy wants me dead? I've already taken care of that pup. Should I die from anything but old age, you'll inherit everything, save a few trinkets for my favorite cousin and Moony. What? It was at that point, looking at Harry's dumbfounded expression, Sirius started a 5-minute laughing fit. Harry was tempted to hex the man, but this was likely healing him better than St. Mungo's had, so he couldn't in good conscience stop him. Next time though. 2 months passed quickly, and on the eve of the day of the second task, the red-headed twins came up to the common room and said, Hermione, McGonagall said she needs to speak with you. Without looking up from the runes book Harry gave her for Christmas, she said, no. The entire common room went silent. 1 or 2 students checked the windows to ensure the sky wasn't falling, as Hermione Granger had just refused instructions from a teacher. The twins looked equal parts impressed and distressed. Hermione told them, I know what she wants and I have no intention of agreeing. Tell her to find someone else. Neville realized what she was referring to and said, me neither, I'm not a very good swimmer. The twins picked up on something and decided it was worth the risk to go along with it. They returned to McGonagall and gave her the pair's message. She was surprised they knew what she was going to ask and not surprised they refused. If she were their age, she wouldn't want to do it either. There wasn't anything further she could do, so she asked the twins to fetch someone else. This time they did ask what for, as if the situation was worth refusing. They had the option of refusing to help. McGonagall caved, as the point of discretion was preventing Harry from learning of it in advance. The fact that he already knew made that pointless. When the twins thought it over, they agreed to fetch the student. They knew he'd agree to help and he could in fact swim. That, and if Harry knew about it, he likely already had a plan. The next day had the whole school and the foreign delegates on some bleachers overlooking the lake. Several men with passive faces had been paid by someone to prevent anyone from approaching the lake for the past month. Cedric had already spent much of January practicing in the lake, so this didn't impede him much. It did however stop Fleur and Victor from practicing, as they only solved the egg after January. The one who paid these men was pleased when reports came in that there were no signs of Potter doing anything in the lake. He also made a few other arrangements to ensure the task went as he felt it should. Either do it with magic or not at all. Harry lined up on the docks with the other 3 contestants. Unlike them, Harry wasn't wearing clothes that would be comfortable when wet, which got a number of reactions, most of them concerned. Cedric simply raised an eyebrow and hoped the first year wouldn't show them all up too badly this time. Up in the sky was a shining silver phoenix, patronus cast by Dumbledore at Harry's request to keep the Dementors as far from the lake as possible. Thanks to this, Sirius was able to join the audience to watch the task. Bagman used magic to turn himself into a loudspeaker and said for all to hear, well, our champions appear ready for the second task and they have 1 hour to recover what has been taken from them. I have also been informed that to prevent outside interference, nothing not currently in the lake or on the champion's person is allowed in the lake. Any wizard approaching the lake will be stopped and any object entering the lake will be destroyed. The man seemed completely ignorant that this would prevent Harry from using the same feat as last time. The reason Harry was sure of the man's ignorance was that he figured the man had bet on him and didn't seem dispirited at the new policy. Cedric and the other contestants all turned to face Harry and observed he still seemed lackadaisical about the new rule. Bagman continued, on the count of 3 we shall begin. 1, 2, 3. The other contestants jumped into the water and waded out into the depths. Harry simply stood there while everyone watched him. The redheads both seemed a bit nervous. Suddenly something broke the surface of the water. Harry's submarine stopped right in front of the dock and opened the hatch on its own, just as the timer he set for it instructed. Harry jumped in and shouted, now Sirius, before closing the hatch and submerging the sub. Sirius Black got a trunk out and set several small items in front of the bleachers. He then used his wand to remove the shrinking magic on them, and now there were several 80 monitors in front of the bleachers. Hermione took over from there and used a remote to turn them on. Harry got a signal from his sub showing he was now live. On each monitor was a feed to one of the cameras on his sub looking out, and a picture of him inside the sub appeared in the corner of each monitor. Harry turned on a microphone and said, testing, testing, do you read? Sirius smiled and picked up the microphone Hermione already turned on and handed to him. He said, Padfoot to Potter, we read you loud and clear. How you doing, Harry? Harry responded from the monitor, not bad. For anyone who has no idea what is happening, the answer is magic. We'll just leave it at that? Hermione shook her head but couldn't keep the smirk off her face. The main feed came from a camera in the front of the sub, so the audience could see what Harry was seeing in the lake as if they were there with him. Bagman, who had removed his voice amplification charm, said, was that thing already in the lake? Sirius said into the mic, Harry, Mr. Bagman wants to know if your sub was already in the lake. Harry answered back from the monitors, yes, I parked it here last year. I would have just shrunk it and carried it like these monitors, but I can't use shrinking or enlarging charms, so I had to plan ahead. That was a lie, of course, but he still wanted people unaware of his skill in magic. Bagman nodded. That was not against the rules, so he had no problem with it. Sirius asked, so what are you going to do, Harry? Well, there are 3 places of interest in the Black Lake. The sunken ship, the giant squid's nest, and the Merman village. I'll be checking those out to see where whatever has been taken from me has been placed. Harry knew it was likely in the Merman village, but he put a lot of effort into this, so he wanted to make it a show. Besides, the Merman village was about a kilometer out and both the sunken ship and giant squid's nest were only a little out of the way. First stop was the ship. Harry turned on the headlights of the sub, which allowed the camera to see the ship they were closing in on. Harry spoke into his mic, this, boys and girls, is the Silver Wand. Before the invention of portkeys in the 12th century, those incapable of apparition or without a fleur relied on this ship to take them to and from Hogwarts each year. It was as traditional as the Hogwarts Express is now. It lasted for 2 centuries before it finally succumbed to the years when magic could no longer restore it. Here it has rested for the last 700 years. Harry drove the sub around the ship, turning the camera to an angle so the monitors would see it, though it wasn't what Harry was facing. Once done with the ship, he turned off the lights and piloted the sub further into the lake. He had in fact used a dozen submersible drones with cameras to map out the lake in the 2nd week of December, so he had no problem finding things. A few of those drones placed markers around the lake bed Harry's sub could use to triangulate its own position in the lake and the position of everything else. Back on the surface and watching the screens, Bagman was slightly upset the spotlight had been taken from him. On the other hand, if Harry had done nothing, then the whole group would spend the next hour watching the surface of the lake waiting for something to happen. He decided to see it as an opportunity and took his time to consider the applications. Those who watched the monitors suddenly gasped when the lights turned back on and the giant red squid was looking at Harry, its enormous body completely dwarfing the small submersible. A tentacle reached out and wrapped itself around the sub, bringing it to the creature's eye. Harry turned the camera and dimmed the lights so it could be seen clearly. Harry turned on the mic and said, the bane of ancient mariners and students at Hogwarts, should the latter decide to go for a dip in the lake. Or at least that's what the chocolate frog card says. The squid released the sub and swam away a moment later. Harry continued, the card isn't quite accurate, however. This squid is ticklish and enjoys bread, which some students often throw into the lake. This fellow is also known to scoop up any first year who falls out of the boat and drops them back in. It is of course a magical squid, as the non-magical types are not ticklish, do not live in freshwater, and do not eat bread. Harry let the lights shine on the ground for a few moments, revealing a lack of anything before saying, to the village. Hermione couldn't stop herself from rolling her eyes at Harry's narration. She looked around and confirmed most of the audience was engrossed in the monitors. Up to this point Harry hadn't used a single spell, so she wondered how he would be judged. 10 minutes later the monitors showed some Grindylows approach the sub and try to grab something. However, nothing they grabbed felt like flesh, so after a few moments they got bored and left Harry alone. Harry dimmed the lights further as the next area seemed to be magically lit. The monitors showed the whole of the merpeople village to many who had never seen it before. One of them approached Harry's sub and the monitor showed Harry waving back and smiling. The merperson swam away and the others simply stood outside their houses and watched Harry's small sub float past them on the underwater street. Harry turned his mic back on, not because he had something to say, but because the merpeople were singing and he felt the audience might want to listen. An hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what we took. Your time's half gone, so tarry not, lest what you seek stays here to rot. Harry's face went a bit stern at that last line. He continued into the heart of the village where he saw a large statue of a merperson, and tied to it by a cord of bundled weeds was 4 humans. Harry asked into the mic, which one's mine? Sirius seemed more than a little amused and asked Dumbledore, which one is Harry's? Dumbledore sighed when he remembered that his first pick and second pick had both figured it out ahead of time and refused. He said, Ronald. Sirius said back into the mic, Dumbledore says it's Ronald. Harry asked back, who? Bagman said, the small ginger boy, which Sirius repeated back. Harry noticed that one of the hostages was indeed the redhead he played chess with. He wasn't particularly great with faces, especially underwater. The location with the statue seemed to be a village square of some type and was surrounded by merpeople, most of which carried tridents. Luckily Harry's sub really wasn't that large, so it did not appear threatening to them. It approached the hostages and Harry was inwardly glad he went with a sub instead of drones. How would drones free a bound hostage? Harry's sub of course had many extras built in for many circumstances. But there was something he had to do first. Harry spoke into the mic and said, hey, I need confirmation. Will any hostage that doesn't get rescued actually be left here? I need someone to tell me otherwise or I'll get them all and damn the tournament. The camera shifted to the little girl floating in the water. The judges discussed this and determined there was not much point in leaving it out now. Dumbledore said, the song is merely for atmosphere. No harm will come to those left in the care of the merpeople. Sirius said into the mic what Dumbledore told him and Harry let out a sigh of relief. He said, thank you. That being said, a mechanical arm came into the monitor screen and placed something against the red-headed hostage. It suddenly attached itself to him like a belt. Harry then attached another object to him which looked like a block with a fan. Harry then used an arm that had some shears on them to cut the rope. The yellow belt suddenly inflated, which caused the redhead to quickly float to the surface. Harry switched the monitor feed from the front camera to the top camera. The merpeople around the village watched with interest and wondered what was going to happen. A moment before the hostage reached the surface, the inflated belt massively increased in size and became a raft that held the redhead above the water. The block he attached turned on and started dragging the raft in the direction of the shore like a small motor boat. Harry, however, piloted the sub off to the side and parked it there. He said back into the mic, "I hope you don't mind if I make 100% sure." Harry wasn't aware of it, but the mother of the little girl was watching from the audience and was more than thankful that someone was keeping watch over her daughter. The rest of the audience had no problem with Harry as they now had the best seat in the house. The monitor had a full view of the statue and the remaining hostages so they'd be able to see what happened themselves. The judges were simply going to rely on what the merpeople told them had happened to score the contestants, but now they didn't have to. Harry's hostage had awoken in his raft that was currently speeding towards the shore. His brothers told him Harry would definitely rescue him, but this was certainly not what he expected. Where was Harry? His raft arrived at the shore and he was met by people with blankets who explained what had already happened. A few minutes later Cedric came by and spotted Harry. He had a bubblehead charm and swam up to the Gryffindor first year and practically shouted, "Really, Harry?" He had no idea he was on television and that his reaction earned an assortment of laughs from the crowd. He shook his head and took out a knife to slice the ropes and free his hostage. Harry was tempted to give them another raft but decided against it. He already helped him enough. Another few minutes passed and a half-man half-shark appeared wearing a Durmstrang uniform. He too took a long look at Harry's sub while Harry waved back at him. The seventh-year seeker tried to rip through the rope binding his hostage with his hands, but they were too slimy and thick. If the man asked for help he'd give him a knife, but offering before he asked would be insulting. After a few moments of looking, Victor found a sharp rock. He actually attempted to get one of the merman's tridents, but they laughed at him. He used the rock to slice the rope, then grabbed the line with his shark jaws and swam away. A few more minutes passed and Harry said into the mic, "Time." Sirius said, "Fluor's out. Seems she got attacked by Grindylows. Time's up in 2 more minutes, so if you have another of those boats feel free to use it." Harry's sub approached the statue again. One of the merpeople said, "Only one," through his glass. Harry said back, "I'll wait till time's up in a minute, okay?" The merperson thought about it for a moment before nodding. Sirius said though the mic, "Time's up, pup, bring her home." Harry already had an arm position to place another belt on her. He then attached not another motor block but a line which tied her to his sub. Harry cut the reed cord rope and the belt inflated again. This time Harry's sub rose with the hostage, and the moment it reached the surface and turned into another raft, Harry floored it and sped the sub towards the shore. At full speed the kilometer back to shore was traversed in a few minutes. The sub landed ashore where another woman quickly made her way to the raft Harry was dragging and grabbed the little girl into her embrace. Harry opened the sub hatch and stepped onto the shore, still completely dry. Sirius chuckled and walked over to the sub to shrunk it for Harry as per the plan. Harry could tell from his smile that Sirius had a very good day. Chapter 12. Chapter 12, preparing for the finals. The scoring was a mixed bag. The Durmstrang headmaster gave him a 0 on account of the lack of magic Harry used. The fact that Harry got his hostage the fastest didn't mean anything to him. Dumbledore gave a 9 and Bagman another 10. Beauxbaton's headmistress gave an 8 for getting her champions hostage and for the interesting entertainment that came with it. Crouch gave a 7, saying he would have given a 10 had Harry used a single spell. Harry didn't particularly care about the points, but the quest said he would be penalized if he did not get full marks for the third task, so hopefully the scoring for that one would be different. The final task was on June 24th, giving Harry 4 months to prepare. What was interesting right after the second task was not the lack of a certain reporter's presence, but the presence itself. Harry had been waiting for her and he had been getting better at identifying specific energy signatures. He felt hers in the tent where he was going to meet his godfather, but he didn't see her, though he did see a beetle that happened to be crammed with exotic energy. Harry whispered to Sirius, "Animagus bug reporter," before saying aloud, "I'm really glad all those bribes Malfoy paid got some good information on the second task ahead of time." Sirius had been a part of more than just 1 or 2 pranks in his lifetime, so he knew how to improvise. He said, "Who can blame him? It's thanks to you the man who controlled him is gone. What better way to thank you than helping from the side? Everyone cheats in a game like this." Harry asked, "Well, since I did as you asked and used muggle toys, the odds of me winning should be in the negatives by now. Malfoy will definitely win back what he put towards this from the bets." Sirius nodded and said with a straight face, "Well, it's thanks to him no one knew I broke out of prison and rescued you from those muggles. The winnings from those bets are definitely deserved. Good job with that Pettigrew thing. Now I don't have to pretend to still be in Azkaban." Harry asked with concern, "What do you think he is going to do to get me to win the last task?" Sirius answered, "Malfoy told me the last task will be some one-on-one duels. We'll get some muggle toys that will let you beat the others easily. I think Malfoy said something about sabotaging the other contestants. I hope he doesn't infect them with dragonpox again. The last time he tried that it wasn't pretty. That poor fellow." Harry innocently asked, "Do I have to cheat?" Sirius answered in a hard tone, "Yes, if not for Malfoy helping me you'd still be with those horrible muggles and I'd still be in Azkaban. We owe him a debt and wizards take debts very, very serious." Harry looked down in sadness, but in reality he was having trouble not laughing at that serious being serious line his godfather snuck in there. Harry left the tent, and after a few moments he confirmed the beetle wasn't following before he couldn't take it anymore and collapsed into a fit of laughter. Sirius also took it as he cue and let it out as well. They laughed like a pair of madmen for a few minutes before his godfather asked, "Animagus Bug Reporter." Harry nodded. "Skeeter, you know her?" His eyes shot up. "The one who did those lovely stories about my adventures." Harry answered back, "I sensed her magic in a beetle in the tent. She showed up instantly after the last task and I was actually waiting for her. Instead of giving me another interview, she decided to play fly on the wall." Harry already told Sirius about his energy senses, and his godfather took it into account during their magic practice over the last 2 months. Harry could almost predict what spell a person was going to cast before they cast it, and he had no problem sensing spells from any direction. Once Sirius realized the very person Harry tricked into writing those ridiculous stories had just heard that performance of all things, he once more burst into a mad, cackling fit of laughter. Both of them were looking forward to what was to come. A week passed and neither were disappointed. The headline was titled "Conspiracy and Lies." It spoke of deceit and betrayal around the Triwizard Tournament and the betting that had been going on in the background and the dirty deeds mixed in. It listed unnamed sources that prove Sirius Black and Harry Potter were cheating the tournament to affect the betting pools due to a debt they owed to Lucius Malfoy for preventing the press from discovering the fact that Sirius Black had escaped prison long ago. The article also mentioned Malfoy's plan to infect the other contestants with dragon pox to ensure Harry's victory. Harry fell out of his chair laughing in the Great Hall. The small blonde Slytherin, who also seemed to be Malfoy, not Mofo like he previously thought, was very confused at the article. When the red-headed twins saw the article and realized what had happened, they bowed to Harry and declared him the Lord of Pranks. He actually got the Daily Prophet to post such an article for all of magical Britain to see. Outwardly Hermione declared it wasn't very funny, but Harry caught a few twitches of her lip as she worked to prevent a smile. At this point in Harry's schooling he had memorized every significant book in the library, including all the material from the restricted section. Harry already got Sirius to agree to take him to the Black family home for Easter vacation next month. Harry intended to memorize every book in that library and spend the rest of the vacation experimenting on projects he couldn't do in the Roar. At this point Harry had already reached the limit of the Roar for training. It couldn't provide greater than 10 times normal gravity, so Harry spent a large amount of time when he could just analyze the magic of the room to see how it was put together. Harry's weekday schedule consisted of waking up at 2 or 3 a.m., 4 hours after sleeping, and heading to the Roar. He'd exercise to his limit, then spend time until morning either experimenting or studying. Much of his studying included charms, runes, and potions. He did buy a large amount of every ingredient and a nice cauldron, so he certainly wasn't going to let Snape stop him from mastering the art. One problem most people had with potions was that they expired after a while. Since time in Harry's inventory didn't move, Harry had stocked an impressive amount of potions and had every intention of increasing that number. The 2 hours before breakfast he'd use battle meditation to earn energy and then return to the dorm in time to join the others on their way to breakfast. The higher his level, the more he needed to level up, and it was already taking 3 days to level at this point. The twins somehow found out about Harry's training and asked him where he went each night. Harry told them about the Roar, which gave the pair some nasty smiles. After classes Harry would tutor Neville and Hermione, the latter getting tutored longer as she was also learning high school classes. Harry would first go over what they learned the prior week to ensure retention of the lesson, then go over the theory of the new lesson, then the practical application. Hermione benefited more from the theory, but Neville learned more from the practical. Both were now doing the equivalent of their 4th-year classes, which for Hermione included the electives of ancient runes and arithmancy. He was also giving her a basic foundation for alchemy by showing her where certain branches of chemistry were applicable in transfiguration and potions. At one point, Hermione jokingly said, "Harry, we're going to run out of things to study soon. Whatever will we do next year?" Harry, however, couldn't meet her in the eye. "Harry." "Hermione, I don't think I'm coming back next year," he honestly answered. "What? Why? I've already memorized the library, Hermione. The whole thing. Other than teaching you and Neville, there isn't much left for me to do here. But you can't leave, you're still underaged. You'll not be allowed to perform magic unless you graduate." Harry shook his head. "Actually, the law says that anyone who doesn't graduate Hogwarts will have their wand snapped and will be forbidden from acquiring another. That doesn't apply to me as I've never used a wand. Also, my entry into the Triwizard Tournament has actually made me a legal adult. I haven't been an underage wizard since the 31th of October." Hermione looked downtrodden. Harry asked with a little hope, "Do you want to come with me?" She looked up and saw that it was a genuine offer. She could leave Hogwarts and return to the Muggle world. She wouldn't be allowed a wand, but she had already taken steps to learn intent-based wandless magic and had confidence she wouldn't need her wand forever. That being said, "I'm sorry, Harry, but I can't." Harry gave a weak smile and said, "That's okay. Can I ask why though?" She answered, "Do you remember what you said when I asked you if you were from a wizard family or a Muggle-born?" Harry half smirked and repeated back, "Neither. I am an anomaly, an aberration, a tear in reality, and a magnet of impending doom. You have been warned." She nodded and said, "This has been the most exciting, the most terrifying, the most insightful, and the most amazing year of my entire life. Warning or not, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But to be honest, Harry, I can't keep doing this. I'm getting burned out. If each of the remaining years of my life are less eventful or even boring, I'd be okay with that. But I know that if I stayed with you, this would just be the beginning, wouldn't it? Harry nodded. He'd grow to like Hermione, then really like her, maybe even more. But he knew that she was right. She was an amazing person, but she was perfectly happy with being a big fish in a little pond. He knew it would be different if he relied on her. She was the type to go above and beyond for anyone in need, but the fact was, he didn't rely on her. Harry said, well then, I promise to at least continue to write when I can. She smiled sweetly and said, I'd like that, Harry. She was happy she wasn't going to lose her friend. Harry's weekdays were almost nothing when compared to his weekends. Sirius would be considered a level 120 wizard with a magic rank of 20, close to 21. When Harry started sparring with him, his own magic path rank was at 16. Thanks to this difference, Sirius had been thrashing Harry for 3 hours a day every Saturday and Sunday. Few knew it, but Sirius Black was actually the strongest wizard below Voldemort and Dumbledore in the whole of Britain. Some thought it was the Charms Professor Flitwick or the Transfiguration Mistress McGonagall, but Sirius could defeat either without difficulty if it came to a fight. Sure, Flitwick was a champion duelist, but duels had rules, etiquette, restrictions. Flitwick's strengths thrived in a fight with such limitations for him and his opponent. But in a fight that didn't have any rules, Sirius would win. McGonagall was the second best user of transfiguration magic in Britain behind Dumbledore, but transfigurations was a flashy, power-intensive magic that looked impressive but lacked finesse. In a fight without rules, she was weaker than Flitwick. Not that either were considered weak, both were equal if not a hair stronger than Voldemort's supposed second-in-command Bellatrix Lestrange. But compared to Sirius Black, both were lacking. He'd been raised with access to the Black family library, yet he had the heart of a knight and the soul of a prankster. He had a reason to become strong, the means to do it, and a mischievous perspective that allowed him to easily think outside the box. The only person on Voldemort's side who could defeat him in a one-on-one fight was Voldemort himself. Even on a bad day, Sirius could play with his cousin Bellatrix without difficulty and even make a show of it. Once Sirius understood Harry's skill level, he dueled his godson without holding back. Harry actually had to brew potions to recover stamina for his godfather so he could put everything into each duel before collapsing. The results, however, spoke for themselves. Harry's magic path rank had increased to 18 and he wanted to get it to 21 before the third task. Once Easter break started, the training was amped up to another level. Harry put every single book of the extensive Black family library in his inventory and then spent what may have been a full year paused before coming out of it. He'd never spent that long paused before because it would distance him from others. However, since Hermione pretty much dumped him, he didn't have a reason to hold back. And that was just the first day. For 2 weeks Harry would spend some unknown time paused going over everything and then unpause and experiment, and finally he would duel Sirius for 3 hours and then digest the practical experience before experimenting some more. Oh, and Harry and Sirius saw something both of them wished they had never seen. On the second day of Easter vacation, the Black family house elf shouted at Goose and told her she was a disgusting creature of the filthy half-blood. Harry had taken Goose with him since he had no intention of leaving her at Hogwarts, and he still spent some time each day chatting with her or petting her. Goose's response to the elf's accusation was to open her mouth and release a swarm of horrible purple tentacles and teeth more terrifying than anything the pair had ever seen. The tentacles grabbed the elf and he screamed and cried out and seemed to try to escape using elf apparition and elf magic, but once bound by the tentacles, it seemed ineffective. The tentacles drew the deranged house elf into Goose's mouth, where they disappeared behind the snapping sound of those unspeakable teeth, which then completely withdrew into her body. Both witnesses agreed never to speak of the incident again. Once Harry got into his rhythm, he realized how much he underestimated the Black family history and magic itself. The Black family had more volumes of grimoires on various types of magics than the Potter family, the Hogwarts library, and Salazar Slytherin's study combined. It wasn't too surprising, as a grimoire is something written specifically by a witch or wizard about their own experiences with magic. A lifetime's worth of wisdom and comprehension on magic, and the Black family library had over 200 of them. Many grimoires dated back to before the time of Hogwarts. There were even a few encoded passages you wouldn't understand without reading the lot, and once Harry had gone over them all a few times, he cracked the code to the deeper aspects as well. Exotic energy was not the only energy that could be used for magic, but it was the only one witches and wizards used. Every generation of Blacks felt that magic powered by exotic energy was the strongest, as other forms of magic would manipulate the rules of nature to achieve the effect, while exotic energy magic rewrote the rules of nature to achieve the effect. One was clearly more powerful than the other. However, there was a problem with that. Each wizard's exotic energy reserve was limited. Other sources of energy were not. Someone using nature energy, which fills the air, could use magic to create a thunderstorm and call down lightning with only some difficulty. Wizards could perhaps do the same or more if they had the reserves, but no witch or wizard had enough internal exotic energy to compare the amount of nature energy that flowed freely outside. It was like comparing a bucket of spring water to a fire hydrant connected to a city's water system. Quantity over quality. Many members of the Black family sought to fix that. They tried to combine their exotic energy reserves with external energies like the energy of nature or dimensional energy. They blew up. Harry figured from cross-referencing history books that every wizard who had gone down the path of mixing energies had exploded. Not figuratively either. Their bodies weren't built to store energy like that. Theirs weren't, but Harry's was. Unfortunately, it was not that easy. Harry tried absorbing dimensional energy and natural energy through his battle meditation, but even if used to increase the level of his body, it didn't allow him to control it or use it to power his magic. He tried to control external dimensional energy, but it wouldn't move as he wished it to. Even if it did, he wouldn't be able to master it before June, so he decided to work on that if he was still alive once summer started. The Black family home itself had many quaint features and random curses on the floors, doors, and items. Harry could see magic, so they didn't catch him unaware, but most of it was odd. Especially that locket in the downstairs drawer. From his senses it looked like a mass of black tentacles trying to infect others, so he didn't want to even put it in his inventory. For 16 days Harry considered this place his home, since for all intents and purposes, his family was here. However, all good things eventually come to an end. At least when the end of the holiday came around, Harry's stats looked much better. Harry Potter. Level 112, age 11. STR 80, AGI 201. In 300, WIS 300. Luck 20. Warrior Path rank 13. Scholar Path rank 17. Magic Path rank 20. Tech Path rank 11. Crafting Path rank 6. Harry spent most of the second week in battle meditation when he wasn't sparring with Sirius. Harry was now able to reliably beat him without having to use blood magic to boost the strength of his spells. Harry was now a master at dodging spellfire thanks to his energy senses and agility. He also finally relented and added a few points to luck, since experimenting was partially reliant on luck and he had many more experiments to attempt. Once Harry returned to Hogwarts, he found some good news and bad news. The good news was that the Dementors had left the grounds. Sirius even agreed to accept Dumbledore's offer and move into a guest room once he found out. The bad news was that there had been a mass breakout of Azkaban and the Dementors were no longer following the direction of the Ministry of Magic. Yeah, that was bad. Also, Harry's request for the goblins to acquire some Muggle firearms for him was denied. Their letter did explain why though. Muggle ammo did in fact tend to go off on its own when stored in a magic-rich area, when magic was used near it, or when used by a magical being. Thanks to that, it was too dangerous to get near, and Gringotts had very specific policies on them. There were even stories of magicals losing fingers or even getting killed just trying to load a Muggle gun. They didn't even have any suggestions on where to get some himself. They stated that in 1997 handguns were made pretty much illegal, so outside of rifles for sport, there were no means to acquire concealable firearms. You couldn't even walk into a store that sold rifles and use magic on the clerk, since the ammo in the store would go off. Harry really wanted one for Plan M, even if he had to manually inscribe every bullet, but it seemed it wasn't going to be that easy. He wanted to face Voldemort and his Death Eaters and whip out 2 Tommy guns and shout, "Say hello to my little friends." He doubted anyone at the time would get the reference, but it would still be satisfying to say. During the second week of April, Harry complained about this problem to Hermione and Neville. Neville was not surprised. Harry thought he would have to face Death Eaters and understood why he wanted a gun. When Harry explained how a fast-moving bullet could go through any magic shield, Neville certainly saw why they appealed to Harry. Hermione, of course being Hermione, made Harry feel like an idiot by asking, "Why can't you make a magic gun that shoots solid bullets using magic?" Harry then spent the next 30 seconds banging his head against the table while Hermione gave him her smuggest grin to date. Although Harry had access to more magical knowledge than anyone in the school, that didn't mean the answers to some questions would just pop into his head. Did he know a dozen different potions recipes that could make something as good or better than gunpowder? Yes. Did he know metal transfiguration spells that would let him mold or strengthen metal to any form? Of course he did. Did he know runes he could directly carve onto bullets that would make them more powerful than an anti-tank round? Why yes he did. But until Hermione mentioned it, he didn't put it all together. Once Harry finished banging his head, he grabbed a parchment and drew a basic schematic of his idea. A few minutes later he walked over to a place he never thought he'd go. He knocked on the door and a few moments later it opened wide and he was faced with the perpetual sneer of Hogwarts. "Potter, what do you want?" Harry said. "Can we speak inside?" The potions professor was tempted to refuse, but his curiosity got the better of him. "Why not?" Harry entered and the man closed the door. His mother had told him much about Snape, as did his father, which was why Harry never took anything the man did to him personally. Harry said, "It's not like I haven't enjoyed our game these last few months, but I need your help with something." Snape didn't seem surprised in the slightest. Harry knew his distaste for him was an act. Mostly anyways. The fact that Harry figured it out and went along with it would help Snape in the long run. But a meeting such as this was dangerous. Should Voldemort return, Snape would be expected to return to his side. The Dark Lord's skill at mind reading was nothing to look down at, and Snape preferred there to be as few interactions between himself and Potter where they were amicable as possible. Snape easily said, "As you know, according to the rules of the tournament, a member of the staff such as myself cannot assist you with anything." Harry smiled at the wording and ignored it before getting out the schematic he drew earlier. He said, "Since we don't know what the final task is yet, this can't be considered assistance for the tournament. I'm going to make this to kill you-know-who and any Death Eater who comes for my life. Do you know how a gun works?" Harry didn't avoid Voldemort's name out of fear but simple politeness. Proving you could say it without flinching was about as classy as swearing during a dinner conversation to prove you were above caring for such things. Snape took the paper and noticed the Muggle weapon shape, but the composition of the gunpowder was written with a potion recipe. Not one he'd heard of, as it was obviously meant for detonation, but that was beside the point. He'd also recognized the runes that would operate the device that may as well have been called an artifact considering how it functioned. A chill went down his spine as he imagined the power behind such an artifact. And it would work too. Mostly. Snape let out a deep sigh and handed back the paper. He said, I cannot be a part of this. If Voldemort ever saw this memory, Snape would certainly be killed. He didn't mind death as he knew he deserved worse, but he would still prefer a less meaningless death. Harry had already figured out Snape's angle and after a few moments said, no one knows I came here. What if you give me all the advice you can think of, then obliviate yourself of the conversation? Then we go back to how we were before. Asking anyone else to obliviate themselves would earn a broken nose, but it was perfectly reasonable advice to a double agent. Snape took more time than he thought to consider it. After a full 2 minutes he said, under 2 conditions. First, I want you to answer every single question I have for you. Tell me what plans you already have and how strong you actually are. You've done a remarkable job until now playing the part of a simple, slightly above average student. Should anyone ask, I can make myself believe it to be true even under veritaserum or legilimency, but if we're going to do this I need everything. Second, before I obliviate myself, I will write myself a letter and give it to you. If you successfully kill the dark bastard then you will return it to me. Do we have a deal? Harry held out a hand without hesitation and they shook on it. Harry told him as much as he could without telling him that he was pretty much a video game character, though he did give a summary of the effects. The extra details he asked Snape not to include in his letter. Once Snape understood the relevant points he said, let me understand this. You are a mutant obscurial immune to the killing curse and poison. If you die from anything else you can easily, albeit painfully, come back to life, though a little weaker. You have a timeless, internal pocket dimension of unlimited size. You are already stronger than myself and that foolish godfather of yours. And yet you intend on coming up with a method to defeat Voldemort, all his Death Eaters, and 100 Dementors, without revealing any of these facts to others. Harry said, I also have the dissected parts of a basilisk corpse. Snape looked longingly to his shelves at his bottle of Ogden's finest fire whiskey but knew that it would be a waste to drink it for a conversation he won't remember. The potions professor said, Dumbledore hid the Sorcerer's Stone in the passage behind the 3rd floor corridor. Unfortunately, it seems to have been stolen during the second task. Harry felt his stomach drop. That wasn't good. Chapter 13, Chapter 13, the third task and a cut scene. After finding out that the item he was supposed to protect was hidden in a place Dumbledore practically told everyone about on the first day, Harry cried out, why did he hide it there? Snape understood the underlying question and said, for a sufficiently powerful wizard, almost any security measure is little better than a delaying tactic. The only one of any real worth is the Fidelius charm, but that spell cannot be maintained on a location without magical residents living there full-time and the secret keeper cannot live there himself. He continued, few know of this, but there are ways of tracking the location of the Sorcerer's Stone, which is why it is not so easy to hide. The corridor contained an assortment of various obstacles and tasks, not designed to stop, but designed to stall the thief. Dumbledore himself intended to deal with whomever came for the stone, so the real security was Dumbledore himself. Harry understood the concept now that he knew better, and once he considered it he did find that there really weren't any truly foolproof security means. Recently he found out there is literally a spell that lets the caster find the direction of what they seek using the incantation point me, for crying out loud, though that too has its limitations. That was also why wizards left their wealth with goblins. There was no perfect lock or security when it came to magic. The only thing you can really use to protect something was strength. Once Snape saw the understanding draw on Harry's face, he said, because of your death, Albus resigned his post as chief mugwump, so he was not informed of the Triwizard Tournament until after he had already swore to Nicholas Flamel to hide the stone for him. Several teachers including myself were stationed around that hall during the tasks, but they seemed to find a way. Harry used his not inconsiderable amount of brain power to put the pieces together in an instant. Pettigrew. Pettigrew is an animagus rat. He could squeeze under the cracks of doors to or go around those obstacles whenever he needed to. If Pettigrew investigated the whole thing then brought the details back to whoever got him free, they would have enough time to figure out how to get around them quickly. Snape's eyebrows raised a bit as he considered it. The truth was that the only obstacle that had any real significance was the Cerberus he refused to call by its given name and the Mirror of Erist. It would be impossible to see it and quickly figure out how to retrieve the stone. However, if Harry's guess was accurate, Voldemort would know of the mirror before he retrieved the stone, and perhaps he found a way around it ahead of time. The mirror wasn't unbeatable after all, it was just Dumbledore's best stalling tactic. Harry asked, can we track the stone? He answered flatly, once the stone had been removed, its trackable signature seemed to have widened from a small space to a vast area. All anyone knows is that it is somewhere in the UK. We can't even tell if it is Ireland, Scotland, Great Britain, or still in Hogwarts herself. Harry wasn't exactly happy, but what's done is done. He went over all his various ideas and plans with Snape. When he saw one of the formulas Harry gave him he said, this aerosol polyjuice potion won't work like this. You'll need a stronger base to prevent the properties from breaking down instantly, and it would never work with hair. Harry considered it and asked if it could be changed to work with blood. Since Harry's blood even used as an ingredient would vanish after a couple of minutes, anything that used it as an ingredient would become ineffective at that point, so it would only last a few minutes. But depending on the circumstances, that wouldn't be a bad thing. Once Snape understood the direction Harry was going, he really wondered how the brat avoided being put into Slytherin. Snape's experience with runes was inferior to Harry's, so he couldn't help with that, but he did know more about potions than the author of any book Harry had in his massive inventory. Like Sirius with light and dark magic and the will to use it, Snape had access and a reason to brew every potion of every alignment and had used his spare time over the last 10 years further mastering the art. This formula has potential, but the critical reaction will take too long. A Muggle weapon fires in nearly the same instant the trigger is pulled. This compound would have a moment's delay, which for your aims would be unacceptable. Also, I understand why you would want an explosion, but a directed force expansion would put more magic into the force of the bullet as it adds to the intent. Harry found that although the potion master was still telling him everything he did wrong as he did in class, the man seemed to be enjoying himself as they were making something new. Harry gave him the uses of the various rune schemes he could use to ignite the gunpowder, and the professor considered the best concoction for a stable but explosive powder that would eject the bullet from a cartridge with enough force and magic to deal with anything in its path. Another hour passed and Harry had a list of different possible gunpowders they thought up together. There was no way to determine which would be the best without further testing. Snape had written a letter to himself and sealed it with his own magic before setting up the stage for his own obliviation. Harry left as he knew the man wasn't likely to go against the plan. If Voldemort had the stone, he could make a body anytime and call his supporters any day. Both Harry and Snape guessed what the man was waiting for, which was why both were eager to complete the formula. Another month passed and Harry had dropped 3 levels, though did gain them back. It was his first death since the tutorial and possibly even more painful than he remembered. It also clearly explained why no one else made a magic gun before this point. He wouldn't bet he was the first to try, but of the list of those who did, there were likely no survivors. If it wasn't for the autocorrection of his crafting path, he may not have been able to even do it successfully at all. On the last week of May, McGonagall told Harry to meet his fellow champions on the Quidditch pitch. On the way he thought about brooms themselves and Quidditch. One would think that a flying broom would be pretty simple, but when Harry placed one into his inventory, he found they were nearly as complex as a car or a computer. Flying brooms had likely advanced over the years, but the complex spells that went into the making of even the outdated ones were far beyond what could be imagined. First, a magic array would be carved out of a large stone and a recess would be carved into the center of the array. The recess would be filled with a special potion that had some alchemic properties and a specially carved piece of wood. The broomstick itself would be submerged into the potion. The magic array would be powered by several witches and wizards, and it would infuse the potion into the broom, which would then harden into a crystal matrix of a very specific configuration. This matrix included the rune scheme pressed into the broom through the magic array, which allowed it to fly using the exotic energy of a wizard. One of the things on Harry's to-do list was to find the secrets of the best brooms and make the best one for himself. For someone with an inventory, a very fast broom would be very useful. Once Harry reached the Quidditch pitch, he saw Ludo Bagman and the others. The field, which Harry visited a few times to run, was no longer flat, but looked like an irregular garden. Cedric stared in horror over the pitch as if the vegetation offended his family's honor. Victor Crumb's expression was firm but appeared to share the sentiments of the Hufflepuff seeker. Bagman noticed Harry's approach and said, "Well, what do you think? Growing nicely, aren't they? Give them a month and Hagrid'll have them 20 feet high. Don't worry, you'll have your Quidditch field back to normal once the task is over. Now, I imagine you can guess what we're making here." Crumb grunted out, "Maze." "Correct. The Triwizard Cup will be in the center of the maze, and the first to get it will receive full points. Points to the other contestants will be determined by how well they did once the cup has been acquired. When you enter the maze will be determined by your current point total." He looked back at Harry and said, "I'm sorry, but it was decided against my objections that other than a wand you cannot take any tools into the maze, no Muggle toys as it were. Nothing foreign can be placed in the maze ahead of time. And nothing not already in the field will be allowed in once the task has started." Harry shrugged and said, "Would it be against the rules if I took a step and then left the maze?" Bagman considered it for a few moments and said, "No, there is no rule to keep the contestants inside the maze once they have entered, but there is only one entrance. Although you are behind in points, Mr. Potter, if you get the cup you earn 50 points regardless, and if the other contestants haven't shown off much before then, you could have enough to win. So I can leave the maze and re-enter." "Yes, but again, you can only enter with a wand. Taking anything else with you won't be allowed, and there will be several wizards stationed around to specifically watch you and make sure you don't use any Muggle toys." Harry smiled, which caused Cedric to frown, Fleur to sigh, and Victor to. Well, he didn't do anything really. Harry returned to the castle and was pleased he wouldn't have to worry about the third task. His quest said he'd be penalized if he didn't get full points, and getting full points just meant getting the cup before anyone else. Another month passed and Harry only died once but gained 2 levels. He finally got a magic gunpowder formula and rune combination that worked for ammo, and a gun prototype that worked well enough for his intentions. His tech and crafting path both ranked up twice, and his magic path ranked up to 22 thanks to sparring with Sirius in the Roar every day. This meant that Harry had gone from 60 times weaker than Dumbledore to about 60% of Dumbledore's strength. Not perfect, but workable. He also had enough secret aces to make him feel somewhat secure, if not comfortable. Though anyone else discovering what he had prepared would ask him to look up the definition of overkill. Was a working reality bomb of questionable stability really necessary to handle a group of terrorists? Harry stood with his fellow champions before the towering maze, and Bagman spoke to the assembled crowd and gave a pause for applause between each sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, the third and final task of the Tri-Wizard tournament is about to begin. Let me remind you how the points currently stand. In first place, with 88 points, Mr. Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts School. In second place, with 80 points, Mr. Victor Crumb, of Durmstrang Institute. In third place with 68 points, Miss Fleur Delacour, of Beauxbatons Academy. And in last place with 65 points, Mr. Harry Potter, of Hogwarts School. Regardless of the point difference, each place would enter a minute after the others, so Harry would enter 3 minutes after Cedric did. Bagman counted off the seconds while each contestant gave another look at Harry and inwardly hoped he wouldn't show them up too badly this time. Once Bagman reached the mark, Cedric sprinted into the maze. Harry took a look into the crowd and wondered how the final boss battle would appear. He hoped it wouldn't be here since there would be a lot of casualties. Sirius was aware of Harry's fears and was sitting in the bleachers with the Gryffindors and a wand in his hand. He met Harry's eyes and gave a devilish smile. He alone knew what Harry was planning. A few seconds before Harry's mark, Sirius got up and made his way to the judges' table to pass on a note. 3, 2, 1, go, shouted Bagman. Harry leisurely entered the maze, waited a moment, then walked out of the maze. Bagman saw this and let his head fall in disappointment. Harry looked him in the eyes and smiled as he shifted into his animagus form and a moment later took flight, directly above the maze. Bagman shouted, "Look at this! Harry Potter is an animagus? Is he registered?" At that moment Sirius had reached the man and handed him a slip of paper which he read before shouting to the audience, "I have just been informed that Harry turned his registration papers in this morning, so he is in fact a registered animagus, a white snowy owl. And he is, yes, he is flying over the maze. I can assure you this is no violation of the rules and he is in fact using magic. Animagus training usually takes years, so no one considered a student to be capable of this, certainly not a first year. This is incredible." From the maze everyone heard a familiar shout of, "Really, Harry?" which caused more than a few giggles. Harry easily spotted the shining cup and swooped down to grab it by his claws and carry it back. The moment he touched it though, he felt himself get dragged by his stomach as the portkey activated. Bagman shouted, "Potter got the cup." Wait, where did he go? A few hundred miles away, a white owl appeared along with a cup in a dusky graveyard. Harry saw the wand pointed at him and heard the shout of stupefy, but as an owl there was nothing he could do. He had no idea he'd experience portkey sickness as an owl when he didn't have that problem as a human. Ping. You have been stunned. Harry woke up tied to a statue. Someone used the spell to revert an animagus to human and also seemed to place a spell on Harry to prevent him from changing back without the removal of the spell. The ropes that bound him were not normal ones but conjured ones and a little stronger than store-bought ones. Voldemort was definitely here since no one else could stun him in a single shot with the ridiculous magic defense granted by his WIS stat. Harry paused the world and looked around. The paused world was immobile, so he couldn't snap his binding and walk about, but he saw enough. He was tied to a statue that had the name Tom Riddle carved into it. No idea who that was. In front of him were 4 people, 3 of which he recognized. Quirrell was there, no surprise. Pettigrew was there, though he looked like a strong breeze would make him beg for mercy. There was a student there in Ravenclaw robes. Harry didn't remember her name since he never paid attention to names, but it was the 5th-year girl Cedric took to the Yule Ball and was his hostage for the second task. You never can tell with some people. Harry wondered what would have happened if Cedric got the cup first. Last was an energetic man with manic eyes. The only thing besides the group was a cauldron 3 times larger than a bathtub which the group seemed to pay a great deal of attention to. Oh, there were also the 100 Dementors flying above the group. How does that not stand out? Luckily Harry's game body and mental protection actually made him nearly immune to Dementors, and they couldn't suck his soul out since his soul didn't really exist in his body. From what Harry could tell, it actually was in the same space his inventory existed. At the moment if Harry were to die, he would reform in the last place he was that he considered safe. That would actually be Sirius' guest room at Hogwarts, so there was no way to crush him repeatedly to level 1. That being said, it looked like the group was up to something pretty bad. Probably better to not die and see what's going on. He unpaused and shifted a little to check for any slack, but the conjured rope constricted when loosened. Harry had a few ways to break it, but now was not the time. Quirrell immediately noticed Harry had woken and said, "Potter, so good of you to join us." Harry calmly answered back, "Well, I've never been one to turn down an invitation to a good party. Where's the entertainment and the snacks?" The man he didn't recognize growled back, "Do not speak to the master without respect unless you want me to rip your tongue from your throat." Harry raised an eyebrow and looked back at Quirrell and said, "I wasn't aware you had groupies, Professor. Congrats, I suppose." Quirrell motioned for the man to calm down before addressing Harry. "Your professor has been dead for some time. Thanks to the elixir of life, I can remain in his body for as long as I wish, but tonight, I shall craft a new body." "Ah, not Quirrell. Well then, introductions I suppose. I'm Harry Potter. Nice to meet you." Harry wasn't going to do the same as a certain redhead and not introduce himself for 6 months. Not Quirrell seemed amused and said, "Very well, Potter, you stand in the presence of Lord Voldemort." Harry kinda already figured that, but he didn't want to assume. Quirrell wasn't wearing the turban anymore and his level would have been about 130 with a magic path rank of 23. Harry wanted to find that turban later so he could examine it as it blocked exotic energy better than the rune scheme Harry took months to create. Voldemort was a little surprised that Harry's lackadaisical attitude survived his own introduction. "That wasn't usual," he said. "Do stay comfortable, Harry, the entertainment will begin shortly." He probably imagined that his evil sneer and morbid tones had caused a shiver of fear to trickle down Harry's spine. At this moment though, Harry had already figured out what was going to happen and was 5 moves ahead. He wondered who hated the Fates so much they would mess up their script this badly. The Ravenclaw student seemed nonplussed about the whole thing. However, Harry realized she was not all there. According to his energy senses, her life force was almost entirely removed from her body and contained within the thin leather book she held. If the book was taken from her, she'd likely die or drop into a coma on the spot. The book itself seemed parasitical and more than a little familiar, but he couldn't place where he'd seen it before. The manic man who yelled at Harry said in reverence to Voldemort, "It's time, my master." He nodded and the man began what seemed to be a ceremonial rite. He picked up a bone and said, "Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son," before dropping it into the cauldron. He gave it a moment and said, "Body of the servant, willingly sacrificed, you will revive your master." Then Voldemort removed a robe, at which point Harry turned away as fast as he could to avoid seeing anything. He didn't turn back until the sound of a plop was heard, meaning he was fully submerged in the cauldron. The man turned to Harry and walked forward with a maniacal grin and said aloud, "Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe." He got out a knife and forced it against Harry's arm and pressed deep before sliding the knife down and leaving a trail of blood to his hand. The man set a vial near Harry's fingers and Harry didn't bother stopping the blood from flowing into the vial by making a fist or anything. Luckily the man didn't notice that his heavily pressed slice was just barely skin deep. Harry's physical defense may not have been as high as his other stats, but it still took a lot to deal any significant damage. Once the vial was full, the man walked back to the cauldron without noticing the wound was already gone beneath the line of blood on Harry's arm. The man carefully poured the blood into the cauldron, which shot out golden sparks, making the man grin with pleasure. From what Harry guessed, the sparks should have been silver. Harry figured a large amount of elixir of life had been added to the mix. That would make things interesting. The sparks fell down and the glow from the cauldron died. A moment later, a man rose from it. Harry turned his head again, but luckily the man said, "Robe me," pretty soon, which made Harry sigh in relief. He really didn't want to see anyone naked today. The newly robed Voldemort looked at Harry for a moment before looking down at his own body. He had a full head of slightly curly brown hair and was relatively handsome by British standards. Harry figured that this body was his masterpiece. With continued usage of the elixir of life, he would keep this body forever. The man from before had already conjured a large mirror and Voldemort was vainly admiring his work. From Harry's senses, the new body was about level 160 with a magic rank of 25. Most considered him weaker than Dumbledore before his fall, but as of now at least he was a full rank stronger than Dumbledore. Harry figured that right now Voldemort would likely trounce Dumbledore in a fair one-on-one fight, the only type Dumbledore would likely give him. He turned back to the man and said, "Show me your arm, Barty." The energetic man, Barty it seemed, quickly rolled up his sleeve to reveal what Harry could see was the so-called dark mark, the sign of a servant of Voldemort. From what he learned, it had faded since the man's fall, but as of now the mark on the man's arm was vividly clear. Voldemort smiled and said, "It's back. They will all have noticed it. And now, we shall see. Now we shall know." He pressed a finger against the mark for a moment and said, "How many will be brave enough to return when they feel it? And how many will be foolish enough to stay away?" He looked back to Harry and noticed he seemed bored. Voldemort approached and asked, "Does my hospitality bore you, Harry?" Harry looked back up and said, "I think between the two of us I have the better track record of being a generous host. Every time I've had an audience I kept them entertained, you know." "Ah yes, I wasn't there for your second task, but I did hear you kept the sheep enthralled by your performance. Your use of muggle toys was as interesting as it was insulting." Harry heard the venom layered on the word muggle and said, "You don't seem to like muggles, do you?" Voldemort gave a cruel smile and said below the level the others could hear, "Just between you and me, Harry, I once had a muggle as a father. I killed him, Harry. I killed him for leaving my mother to die. It is his tomb you are currently bound to, Harry." The sound of whooshing came from above and Voldemort said, "But look, Harry, my true family returns." 15 wizards fell from the sky and knelt in a semicircle around the spot they had been summoned. Some wore masks, others did not. Those who didn't Harry recognized as escapees of Azkaban. Harry wondered why they weren't here to begin with. After considering it, Harry figured he wanted them there after he had returned to full power. Voldemort began his monologue. He told everyone how disappointed he was in them and how displeased he was that they had lost faith. He spoke of those who remained loyal like Barty and those liberated from Azkaban, but also said that the others had a debt to him that they would not escape paying it in full, one way or another. Harry didn't feel like standing on Voldemort's dad's grave anymore, so he cast the Notice Me Not to prevent people from noticing Harry Potter was no longer bound. It wouldn't last long once people actually turned in his direction, but it would last long enough. Harry broke the ropes and walked to an empty spot before taking item after item out of his inventory. From the group Harry heard someone say, "Master, we crave to know, we beg you to tell us how you have achieved this miracle. How you managed to return to us. Ah, what a story it is, Lucius. It begins with our guest here who we shall entertain in just a moment." That night you see, Harry tuned out the man and conjured a few items. He wondered if this was a game if he would be in a pre-boss fight cutscene. The foolish wizard sought me out for knowledge and power when all others had forsaken me. I granted his wish of course but for a price. For you see he was a teacher at Hogwarts, and I learned that the Philosopher's Stone, the source of the elixir of life, had been taken there. Fate itself was on my side. Aided by the will of magic, 3 allies had come to my aid. Harry cringed when he thought that Voldemort considered Harry's hell mode his own personal aid. If only he knew what was coming. The Triwizard Tournament was to be held, the old fool would be too busy to protect the stone. Harry Potter himself aided me, though not by his choosing. I entered the boy's name in the Goblet of Fire as a 4th champion to further distract the old fool. Mr. Potter further aided me by revealing Pettigrew. Harry noticed the lumpy man violently twitch which seemed to make Voldemort smile. He continued, "A coward he is, but when I saved him from certain imprisonment, his life became mine to use as I wished. His animagus form easily bypassed Dumbledore's protections of the stone and gave me what I needed to take it myself when the time was right." He turned to the Ravenclaw student and then back to the man he addressed earlier, "Lucius, my slippery friend. In a way you disobeyed me and had things gone differently that would have cost you your life. And yet it was this act that yielded me another ally. The diary I told you would ensure my return has done so, but not how I expected it to. It possessed the student you left it to. Once I discovered this, I assisted with the possession and she became my most valued aid in this. Believe it or not, the removal of the Dementors and the destruction of the wards around Azkaban can both be linked directly to her aid." When Voldemort began to describe how he found Barty and his plans for a new body, Harry tuned him out again. He had poured some bottled water into a tea kettle and was using magic to boil it at the moment. Once it reached the right temperature Harry poured himself a cup and waited just a moment for it to cool. But how could I capture him from under the nose of the muggle-loving fool? The tournament I myself entered him into provided that very answer. And here he is, the boy you all believed had been my downfall dash. Slurping sounds. The notice me not charm instantly died to the sound of Harry finishing his tea as every Death Eater was now looking at him sitting at a table with a tea set casually drinking tea before a group of the deadliest people in all of Britain. Harry looked at them and said, "What? Back at Hogwarts?" Sirius Black had long since followed the instructions of one of Harry's contingency plans and set up those monitors from the second task. One of the first things Harry pulled out from his inventory was a couple of flying drones and they all had cameras he'd taught Sirius how to pilot once the Marauder understood the implication for pranking they had. Above them all was a special drone that hovered high in the air and took the feed from the other drones and would broadcast them to the monitor Sirius set up. Only moments after Harry broke his binding the feed had started. This meant almost all of Voldemort's monologue and every name he mentioned had been heard. Sirius himself was half tempted to rush to that graveyard as fast as he could and half tempted to laugh himself to death at the absurdity of Harry throwing himself a tea party in front of Voldemort's Death Eaters. Author's notes. My ability to post so fast is powered by favorites, follows, and reviews for each chapter telling me your favorite parts and if any part of the chapter made you laugh out loud. And not just this chapter, but other chapters as well. Chapter 14, the boss fight. Harry put down his teacup and said, "Would you like me to pour you some tea?" Reducto. One of the Death Eaters behind Voldemort, Bellatrix, Harry figured, fired a blasting hex at Harry's table. Harry grabbed a plate and took a step back as the table and the rest of the tea set exploded. Harry brushed off his robes and said, "How rude. If this is how you treat your guests I can't imagine you're going to be very popular in the future. How dare you?" Crucio. Bellatrix cried out. The Cruciatus curse was a red beam that traveled in a relatively straight line. Harry saw where her wand was pointing and moved the plate he was holding in front of him, directly blocking the unforgivable. Normal plates for tea sets can't block such a powerful spell without exploding of course, but this particular plate was one of Harry's masterpieces. Hidden under the decoration were intricate rune sets that rendered the plate saturated with exotic energy yet frozen in place. Bellatrix's spell was like shooting a water hose at a glacier in the hopes it would break through. Harry shifted his gaze to Voldemort while continuing to casually block the torture curse with fine china and said, "Have you taught them how to duel? They have no proper etiquette, do they?" Voldemort said, "Enough, Bellatrix." "But master, he dash. Be silent." Harry tossed the plate away like it wasn't worth anything and faced Voldemort. This made the man's face twitch as it went against his guess there was something special about the plate. Now however he had their attention. Harry said, "Now did you want to talk, to duel, or play a game I had in mind?" "Oh, and what game would that be?" "Hide and seek. All of you against me. I swear on my magic I won't leave this area until the game is over." None of them noticed the pink mist falling from above released by the flying drones. Harry continued to in order to keep their attention on him. "Rules are simple. After 10 seconds, I'll hide. I'll have 5 seconds to hide. After 5 seconds, if you find me, you can kill me. Winner gets fabulous prizes. If no one finds me and you all give up, then since you won't have found me I'll likely be alive." Lucius said, "What childish nonsense." The possessed Ravenclaw said, "Is this your big plan to survive?" Harry smiled and said, "Not exactly. It has been 10 seconds by the way, so now I have 5 seconds to hide. 3, 2 dash." Several explosions occurred at everyone's feet and the area was filled with a red-tinted smoke. Harry stunned the possessed Ravenclaw and summoned her wand. The cameras on the drones had filters that allowed them to see through the smoke and they all focused in on Harry as he transfigured his robe into an adult's robe and carefully lied down on the ground, seemingly faking his death. Through the monitors the audience gasped as they saw the Death Eaters shift their form. Suddenly, they each looked like Harry Potter. Several encountered each other through the smoke and spells began to fly. One camera closed in on Harry and saw him smile before going back to the others. Dozens upon dozens of spells shot around, various shouts called back left and right that they'd found him. The audience realized that no one knew they all looked like Harry Potter. Sirius picked up his mic and said, "This gas you see is an aerosol-type polyjuice potion. It only lasts about 5 minutes but will turn anyone who breathes it in into the same person, in this case, Harry. The gas also contains a weak befuddlement draft and forgetfulness potion. Even if they shoot down a Harry, they will forget about that if they see another Harry. They are also less likely to notice they themselves are a Harry." Spells continued to fly back and forth as the heads of many ancient magical houses were killed off. Sirius considered this and said into the mic, "For those of you wondering, neither myself nor Harry can be held responsible for these deaths. If someone dies due to your actions and they are trying to kill you, it is self-defense. In other words, this can be considered self-defense unless someone here thinks those Death Eaters are not in fact trying to kill Harry Potter." Another Harry died, and Voldemort came into the screen. It seems old Moldy Butt wasn't affected by the potion. Oh well. Harry himself was using his energy sense to figure out what was going on around him without moving. Voldemort seemed to have figured it out and shouted, "Everyone stop." Harry used that moment to lock onto 3 different Death Eaters and cast the slippery jinx on their wand hands while hidden through the smoke before summoning their wands from them. Wands and items possessed by another person's magic are nearly impossible to summon from them due to the interference of the other person's magic, which is why he could only summon them after using the slippery jinx. It was a fact that jinxes could only be cast while looking at something, but Harry could get around this with his energy sense, meaning he could use his jinxes through the smoke when others could not. Voldemort shouted, "Everyone to me." Harry felt the exotic energy in the man build for a moment before he called forth a torrent of wind to scatter the gas and smoke. He looked around and said, "Kneel." Every Harry knelt in place. He said, "We have been tricked. Look at yourselves." "What is this, my lord?" came from one of them in Harry's voice. "Normal polyjuice potions don't change the voice unless you force it. Normal polyjuice needs hair though, this one needed blood." Voldemort glared at the Harry and said, "Where is your wand?" Everyone knew Harry didn't have a wand. The Harry looked to their empty hand and said, "No, I'm Dash. Avada Kedavra." And the energy Harry felt from Bellatrix Lestrange vanished from the world. The camera shifted back to Harry, who gave another smile before turning back to the group. There were only 4 Death Eaters left and only 2 had wands. Considering there were 15 earlier, it was quite the drop in Harry's favor. Voldemort shouted, "Everyone take out your wands." He saw 2 wands but noticed the 2 missing. One of them said in Harry's voice, "It's me, my lord, Goyle." "Is that so? Tell me something only Goyle would know." I've served you faithfully for years, my lord, it's me." Sirius, watching this over the monitor, said, "Some people are affected by forgetfulness potions more than others." Voldemort gritted his teeth waiting for some proof, and when none came, he shouted, "Avada Kedavra," once more. He turned back to the 2 wands that were held out and noticed neither was Barty's. He asked the remaining man without a wand, "And you, tell me something only you would know." "I'm Caro's, my lord. You ordered me to gut the Bones woman and set her ablaze, my lord." "Ah yes, that's right. Now, all 3 of you go around and find anybody without a wand." It was known that someone dying under polyjuice would not revert back to normal, which would make this game of hide and seek very difficult. The camera once again zoomed back on Harry holding a wand before going back to the search. The group spread out, and when the camera wasn't on Harry, he pulled his magic gun out and shot Voldemort, then the first wizard still with a wand, then the second, then the last one. The sounds were far, far louder than a normal gunshot, and even the audience watching from the monitors had to cover their ears after the first. Harry's aim was dead on, and large holes formed in the torsos of all 4, though when Voldemort collapsed, a moment later the hole refilled itself, healing him. Voldemort quickly got up and fired off a half-dozen spells but wasn't able to save his remaining Death Eaters. Harry dodged the shots and fired his gun back at the immortal Dark Lord, who quickly dodged 2 shots before Harry ran out of ammo. Harry placed the gun in his robes and said, "How's that immortality thing going for you?" Voldemort's anger was only tempered by the satisfaction of knowing he was now truly immortal. Even he was impressed by how quickly he recovered from the lethal damage. He spat back at Harry, "Nothing you have done here will matter. Now I will never die, nothing can stop me, and you, I will not kill you quick, Harry Potter. No, I will grant you immortality as well, just so I can ensure your torment lasts for all eternity." Harry smirked at that and looked at his arm. The blood that had stained it from the knife wound earlier was fading away. Harry said, "About that, you really shouldn't have used my blood. You should be feeling it in 3, 2, 1. Voldemort suddenly collapsed, his body fighting against him. What have you done?" "Nothing, you're the one who wanted my blood. You did this to yourself. Your body is breaking down, the elixir of life is keeping you together, but just barely. In this state your body is doing everything it can to keep itself in one piece. You can't use magic and you don't have a portkey. You're done, Volda. Harry didn't know the exact details of these rituals, but he extrapolated enough to know what was going on with the man's body. The Dark Lord sneered with venom and said, "So you even saw this coming. You sabotaged your own blood. It matters not. I will return. I will never die. I will dash." Meow. Somehow a certain orange tabby cat appeared. Harry said, "Goose, what are you doing here?" Goose conveyed back through the link, "I'm tired of you needing to deal with this one." When Harry realized what was about to happen, he shouted to the cameras, "Sirius, turn the cameras away. Now." Sirius realized with horror what was about to happen and used the controls to twist every drone to face away from Voldemort. The sound was still coming through though. From the monitors everyone heard Voldemort's voice, "What is this? What? Oh Merlin, what is that thing? No, get it away. No, get it off me. What is this monster? No, oh Merlin, no, not like this. I am Voldemort, I cannot be. No, please, please, not like this." After another moment of terrified screaming, silence resumed. Harry said, "Okay, it's over." The cameras turned back to where Harry and Voldemort were. Except Voldemort was nowhere to be seen and the cat seemed to be casually walking away. Sirius felt bad he hadn't turned the sound off, as many would be emotionally scarred for life, but at least they didn't have to see it. He noticed something odd and the camera focused on the downed Ravenclaw everyone heard was possessed by a diary. The diary itself seemed to be turning black and a moment later, it dissolved into ash. Dumbledore had been watching this part with interest. He was of course initially terrified for Harry at first, but once Harry started pouring tea for himself, Dumbledore realized the boy seemed to have things under control. Dumbledore had many suspicions about that diary, but the fact that it dissolved with Voldemort's vanishing was beyond anything he could comprehend. He was tempted to ask what had occurred, but his own wisdom told him with no uncertainty that some things were better left unknown and unsaid. Harry said to the sky, "I think I'm in Little Hangleton, so you can send backup. Oh, and for anyone wanting to know where I got my toys, I figured this would happen, so I asked Sirius to set a timed port key to bring them to me. Sirius, you can pack up now." Sirius took that as his cue and turned off the monitor. He figured the real reason Harry wanted it off and didn't intend to argue. Harry equipped a basilisk and venomed goblin steel dagger Sirius had gifted him and went from survivor to survivor, cutting each and healing the wound. Many of the Death Eaters had only been stunned or knocked out in the fight, and Harry's energy sense could tell the survivors from the corpses. Harry also noticed that when the diary had dissolved, for some reason, and the Ravenclaw's stolen life force had returned, she wouldn't be out and about for a while, but she'd live. Harry hoped to rescue her earlier, which was why he stunned her before the spells started flying, and was glad it worked out. As he went around slicing and healing, some part of him thought killing defenseless humans would feel different, that making a choice he probably had no right to make would make him feel ill or unclean. But deep down, to him, it was just another monster to kill like the thousands he had slain in the tutorial and during battle mediation. He wouldn't bother justifying it. They had taken actions to kill him, and though he had a choice to leave them alive, he had no intention of doing so, especially when he could get away with it. He may like saving people, but that was more of a hobby than a calling. He wouldn't go out of his way to save someone who he didn't feel like saving, or spare someone who wasn't likely to repent. Something about the battle was still nagging him. Sure, it was anticlimactic. He only had to use plans C, G, and M and got lucky on the rest. Had Voldemort used Cedric's or anyone else's blood, Harry would have been kinda screwed, as the Dark Lord's healing factor exceeded Harry's damage threshold, so he'd lose if they tried trading blows. Harry got a cold shiver just remembering how that melon-sized hole in Voldemort's gut closed like it was nothing at all. Harry looked through his inventory as all his other plans and contingencies came to mind, and he considered how differently that could have gone down. The reason he didn't use the basilisk and venomed grenade, for example, was because he figured that couldn't be justified as self-defense. If things got worse, he still would have used it, but it wasn't worth it if there was a better option. He also couldn't take out his reality bomb, which would likely break every law of physics within 100 miles, as the town of Little Hangleton was just too close. If enough Death Eaters hadn't killed each other, he might have needed Plan K, where he would equip 2 daggers and weave himself through the smoke, slicing every Death Eater around. If every Death Eater fired survivable spells at him simultaneously before he could start his game plan, he would have had to use Plan E to equip the magical mirror shield he made and gotten out his grenades right away. Not too long after the last survivor succumbed to the basilisk venom, a group of a dozen in aura robes led by Amelia Bones operated in. She had her wand at the ready and took a few looks around before settling on Harry. "What happened here, Mr. Potter?" Harry felt the buildup of magic from 7 sources and jumped back. Amelia and 4 other aurors dropped to non-verbal stunners while Harry dodged the other 2 cast at him. Now Harry knew what had been nagging him. The ping notifying him of the end of the quest hadn't shown up yet, and he hadn't gotten any energy from the kills yet. This was hell mode. After the boss fight was the second, even harder boss fight. What could be more obvious, right? "Quick reflexes, kid," said one of the aurors. Another of the 7 pointed his wand into the air and it glowed with a black light. The swarm of Dementors, which Harry had kinda forgotten about, came down and destroyed Harry's drones. Harry felt that although each of these men was below Sirius in power, it wasn't by that much. The strongest one seemed to be able to give his godfather a run for his money. What was not normal was that each of them was more powerful than Flitwick or McGonagall. That level of wizard was not common, and other than Bellatrix, Voldemort's followers were mostly far weaker than he was. At least the ones he'd heard of. Bellatrix, Flitwick, McGonagall, and Sirius. Besides Dumbledore and Voldemort himself, these four were the strongest in Britain, with a wide margin between them and the next strongest. Yet this group was stronger than them all combined. And since they fired simultaneously, that meant they trained to work together. Not good. Harry said, I don't mean to be rude, but who exactly are you? I'm Harry, by the way. The man smiled back. Hello, Harry. I'm Vinny, captain of the Knights of Walpurgis. I guess you can say we're the true Death Eaters, the original in fact. So who are they? Harry motioned to the corpses which mostly killed each other earlier. Trainees mostly. Distractions, muscle, grunts, disposable pawns. You get the idea. Only the true elite join the Knights. One of the so-called Knights said, what has happened to our lord? Harry turned to notice that Goose was gone. No idea where. Then again, he had no idea how she arrived either. He very much doubted the "my cat ate your dark lord" excuse would fly with these men. Harry said, no idea. I think he said something about Tahiti and a chair by the pool with his name on it. The man frowned and said, it isn't polite to be stubborn, Potter. Crucio. Harry felt their magic build up at the word polite, and the three knights cast at Harry and the space to the left and right of him when the man said Potter. Harry tried to leap further than the spell to his left to dodge, but it struck him and lit his nerves ablaze. At this point Harry realized a few things. First, the men's coordination was based on verbal cues. Like cast the torture curse when he used the word polite and cast it when he said Potter. Second, Harry realized that the torture curse, the worst pain anyone could possibly experience, as the spell itself literally forced the person to experience the max level of pain, still didn't compare to dying and reviving. As an intellectual, Harry understood it. Death while alive was like having every sense he possessed experience every possible sensation at the same time without any of them drowning out the others. In life, people can only truly experience one sense at a time. This was not true in death, and there were far more than just a single type of pain. The sensation of burning under the hottest brand while freezing in the most biting of ice while being electrocuted and stretched and crushed all simultaneously. That was dying while alive. Birth was somehow worse. It was going from having no sensation to having living sensation, which was like going from 0 to 100 in no time at all. No matter the type, pain is something that one can get used to. However, when a person is born, they have no tolerance for pain in the slightest. If max pain when under the torture curse is a 10, the pain of death was 10 plus 10 plus 10 ECT. The pain of birth, however, was pretty much infinity, as there was no cap due to zero pain tolerance. Yeah, the torture curse sucked. Yes, he was crying and screaming. But no, not the worst he'd ever felt. The man stopped the spell, and the one from before raised his wand in the air and black light shined out once more. Several Dementors descended. He said, how about this? Every time I ask a question and you don't answer truthfully, I'll have a Dementor eat one of their souls. He pointed at the unconscious Aurors. Harry asked, I thought only Voldemort could control Dementors. No, you silly boy. He was willing to teach his most loyal and most skilled knights that treasured skill. We were the ones who removed the wards from Azkaban after receiving contact from the child possessed by our lord. Harry asked, you work for the ministry? The men all seemed to chuckle. One answered, for? No. We worked in the ministry. Unmarked and unknown. Aurors, unspeakables, file clerks. It was only today we all took the guise of an Auror to find you to learn of what happened to our lord. At least now this answered the question of why Voldemort's most skilled servant was a madwoman. The other skilled ones got a raise and hid themselves. Bellatrix probably didn't qualify for a promotion due to the whole insanity thing she had going for her. Another of the knights said, no more questions. You will answer our questions now. Harry smirked back and said, unless you have the ability to know when I'm telling the truth, even if I did you wouldn't believe me. One of them pulled out a vial and said, if you insist, you'll have to drink this. Harry easily figured what it was and said, fine, give it here. The man didn't approach and just tossed it to Harry. Harry paused in that instant and looked back over his inventory to decide on a plan. He had downed friendlies in the field, so no grenades, explosives, or poisons. All drones were destroyed in the air, and somehow the Dementors ate the magic of the potions a few had been carrying, so those wouldn't help. Although a few of these elites looked up a fraction to see the flying vial, they still had their guard up and were prepared for Harry to do anything. A blinding light might work on a few but not all. Harry did exaggerate a little during the torture to make it look like he couldn't move, but he could if need be, though he'd still prefer not to get hit with that again. At the moment Harry had a dagger and a second gun in his robes. However, from what Harry could see, these men were faster on the spell draw than Harry was on the gun draw. He didn't doubt they'd be able to dodge, and his gun only had 6 shots. Unless he caught them off guard like the Death Eaters, he'd need to rely on magic, but there wasn't a single spell capable of taking on 7 cooperative serious level opponents. He didn't mind dying, but the souls of Amelia Bones and her Aurors were on the line. He needed them distracted or off kilter, but these guys were professionals. They wouldn't get distracted by amateur stuff. He couldn't think of. Wait, didn't they just throw him a truth potion? Would that work? Time to try some luck. Harry unpaused and caught the vial. How much do I drink? Just drink the whole thing. There's no lethal dose. Harry knew that, but he couldn't show he knew it, so he had to ask. Harry opened the vial, and before the whole group downed the Veritaserum. Ping. No lies, debuff added, unable to tell a lie or remain silent for a question while debuff remains active. Harry tossed the vial away and said, well, where is Lord Voldemort? One asked. He got eaten by a flurkin. Eaten? One of them shouted. It was technically a question, so Harry answered, yes, he was eaten by a goose. Not a lie, just addressing her by her name. Wait, a goose. Still technically a question, so he answered, yes, he was eaten by the cat I am the pet of. Harry was still not sure what a flurkin was, but he could honestly answer he thought it was just a very special breed of cat. Probably wrong, but he didn't know that. One of them said, what's your worst fear? Probably trying a baseline question they figured Harry wouldn't answer normally. Harry answered honestly, dying 115 consecutive times. Harry wondered what a boggart would look like to him. A pile of dead Harry Potters? No, there was one of those behind him and he didn't mind in the least. Another of the knights asked, do you think you're going to leave here alive? Harry said, I've accepted I'm going to die and I don't plan on leaving here. He certainly wasn't going to run away, and it was true he'd accepted he was going to die at some point. Wouldn't be the first time. The one who asked said back to the others, he's telling the truth, or at least he thinks he is. So our master got eaten by a Furby, a goose, and a cat. I think he said flurkin, though I'm not familiar with the term. Another knight asked, what is a flurkin? Harry shrugged and said, I don't know. He didn't, not for certain anyways. Is he crazy or immune to veritaserum? Or was that a bad batch? Are you questioning my brewing skills? His pupils, tone of voice, and speech rhythms match that of veritaserum usage. Unless you believe a first-year child can fake those flawlessly enough to deceive me. Now see here. It was time. Harry paused and opened the settings. He turned the dialogue sound off and changed the brightness settings. He unpaused and cast a Lumos Maxima that could put ignited white phosphorus to shame. The group of professionals had been so thrown off by a taste of the truth that they dropped the guard they had kept up the whole time. It didn't stop 4 of them from near instantly casting stunners at Harry. But unlike the prior attacks, these lacked perfect coordination, and since Harry could see and they couldn't, Harry was able to slip between the spells to successfully dodge. Harry then cast an obscure charm that made an illusionary copy of himself next to where he stood, and last he silently operat to the other side of the graveyard. Now the game could begin. Chapter 15. Chapter 15, the post-game hidden boss. Harry had no idea how long he remained paused, coming up with one strategy after another. The first strategy would be to buy more time and reduce the enemy's number. Harry already had a means to achieve this, but it would take 3 seconds to work. He should have it though. The illusion he left of himself at his original position should draw the attention of the other party for at least a second and a half, and Harry didn't think they'd be able to find him within the following 2 seconds. The next step would be to remove the non-combatants. Amelia Bones and the other 3 stunned aurors would have to be summoned over to where he was. That would take 6 to 7 seconds, but the distraction from the first step should provide enough time. The plans diverged from there. Harry could unload all the toys from his inventory, such as magic shields, magic shotguns, and magic bombs, and wake the aurors. If they took the stuff he gave them, they'd have a good fighting chance. The problem though was that it was far too likely they would ask questions when they were woken, which was a problem for someone under the effects of veritaserum. Worst case scenario was that they wouldn't believe Harry when he told them the truth instead of something more believable. He could get around this by stabbing himself with a knife, waking them, then dramatically pulling it out in front of the awakened aurors and say, they're trying to kill me. But was all that worth the effort? Next plan was to send them back. The so-called knights didn't bother setting up any blocks against teleportation, so Harry could attach some port keys he made to the aurors and send them to a space he designated just outside the Hogwarts wards. If Harry sent them back, Harry was cleared to leave as without hostages. There was nothing to keep him there. He could also fight back, go all out. Worst case he'd die, but without hostages that'd be fine. Painful, but fine. Fighting them would not be easy no matter what he tried. Since one of them had brought veritaserum, Harry had to consider that they had other things as well. Harry went through plan after plan, but none worked easily without relying on luck and cheap shots. A while longer than Harry would ever admit, he found a solution to the group's teamwork that should weaken them. Splitting them up. These guys were a strike force, the ultimate weapon that could handle any situation. But what if that situation was the end of the world? After finalizing the plan and thinking up a dozen more contingencies and going over each a few more times, Harry felt he was ready. Once unpaused, Harry took out 3 items from his inventory and banished them into the sky. The sound of spellfire quickly died from where he had been, and Harry had already taken a sphere from his inventory about the size of a large medicine ball. It was the reality bomb. Harry initiated a reaction that would cause the magic to build up and go critical soon and banished it lightly in the direction of the knights. The items he'd banished into the sky were unstable spell grenades. Or so he called them. The same way Harry could freeze magic to prevent exotic energy from getting into Muggle-tech, he could also use it to prevent exotic energy from getting out. Using some materials made with alchemy, he made an item that could store the magic from a spell. For a moment anyways. His ceiling wasn't perfect. But if Harry cast the same spell on the item over and over, it would eventually accumulate enough exotic energy to reach critical mass and detonate with the power of the accumulated spells once the shell was overpowered. However, from the point of critical mass to the explosion itself was only about 5 seconds. Luckily, Harry's inventory stopped time, so Harry would make them and place them inside after 2 seconds. The items Harry took out were Patronus grenades. 3 back-to-back detonations occurred in the sky, followed by 3 blinding flashes of silver light. Harry used the summoning spell on the 5 aurors to quickly drag their bodies to him while the sky distracted the others. The knights who looked up saw 3 massive silver dragons, each even larger than a Ukrainian iron belly. The wingspan of the silver beasts covered more of the sky than the horde of the 100 Dementors. Harry hadn't bothered looking up and removed 6 Portkea galleons from his inventory and placed them on each auror and the unconscious Ravenclaw he initially operated next to faster than a normal human could move before saying aloud, "Activate," and sending them all away. Harry couldn't hear his own voice as he turned the dialogue audio down to 0 in his settings, as if he heard a question he'd still have to answer it, but now he couldn't hear any dialogue. Luckily the sound of spells cast and the sound of a dragon roaring were both considered battle sounds which he didn't touch. Harry didn't have time to look up, so he just paused and took a moment to admire his work. Harry's standard Patronus was a van-sized dragon. The grenades could accumulate 20 Patronus charms before detonating, and the spell was one of the few that could be amplified beyond the power then was put into cast it once it reached critical mass. The Patroni dragons were exhaling silver flames at the groups of Dementors which seemed to burn them to dust. Harry unpaused and took out 4 rune tokens and activated them all before banishing them north, south, east, and west. Harry made sure the knights hadn't left, and at least for now they wouldn't be able to. With the ward he just enabled, no one could safely teleport in or out of the area within 2 kilometers of the location, not even elves. They could force it of course, but the barrier would slingshot them into space if they used enough power to break through. The tokens would burn themselves out in 10 minutes, which was 3 minutes longer than the reality bomb had. Spells started flying at Harry from the Knights of Walpurgis, but they were much further than they had been, so Harry had more time to dodge. Harry couldn't hear what they were shouting at him besides spell names, so Harry used Sonorous on himself and yelled out, "The trap is set. The bomb will blow in 6 minutes. You're all going to die and there is nothing you can do." All true of course. Harry saw a few yelling at him, but Harry couldn't lip read, so he said while still amplified, "I can't hear what you're saying, so don't bother asking me anything." Harry really wanted to say he obliviated himself of English, so they had to ask all their questions in French. That unfortunately was a lie. The reality bomb was sparking with magic and impossible to ignore. Harry was pleased that none of the opponents was stupid enough to fire a spell at it. Harry continued to dodge spells and hide behind things. He used just enough speed to dodge, but not his max speed. 2 of the knights finally relented and moved to diagnose the bomb. There were a few ways to disable it before it went off, but they wouldn't be easy. Ping. No lies debuff has been resisted. Harry paused and changed the setting to turn the voices back on and unpaused. One of the men shouted while maintaining spellfire at Harry, "The port keys have failed. Can you disable that thing, Dawn?" "Yes, sir." Harry took out another magic grenade and banished it at the group. One of them spotted it and fired a spell at it, causing a small explosion. Harry pulled out 2 more and banished them together at the same person. 2 spells fired from 2 of them at the grenades, but this time it caused a massive explosion. It threw 3 of the knights back but didn't kill them. That had been one of Snape's ideas, a variation on the irrumpent potion. The first he threw was an empty distraction, but the second and third grenades were actually metal cans filled with a very special mixture of ingredients. It would do nothing if ignored, but if mixed with magic, it created an absolutely massive explosion. There was a reason Snape didn't want wands in his potions classroom. Some ingredients just didn't respond well to excess magic. The silver dragons had killed over half the Dementors and the rest were scattering. The dragons gave chase and intended to destroy every last one. Though the explosions didn't kill any of the knights, it did have the effect Harry wanted. The one working on Harry's reality bomb loudly swore and said, "Kill him, sir. That brat's toys are making this blasted contraption even more unstable. We're only got 3 minutes now." The one who seemed in charge shouted, "Brenton, help Dawn. Initiate Thunderfall." 2 were now working on the device and the boss maintained lookout while the remaining 4 ran towards Harry while casting non-verbal stunners over and over to prevent him from running far and seeking cover. Every 3rd or 4th spell cast was a reducto ahead of Harry to blow apart the ground in front of him to slow him down. Harry could sense the spells without looking and it wouldn't be difficult to outrun them, but he needed them on his heels for just a little longer. Once Harry had enough distance he turned around and dashed forward. Harry cast a flying spell orb that looked like a ball of wiggling strings that untangled and spread larger and larger as it got further from Harry. By the time it reached them it was 3 meters in diameter and every string was in fact a cutting curse. Though unfamiliar with the spell, the knights who saw it understood what it was and moved to dodge rather than block or counter. Countering such a spell would cause the condensed weave of cutting curses to explode out instantly. Harry used the opening and shot a stream of condensed cutting curses as if it were a flamethrower from his hand. Anything the stream faced would end up looking as if it had been cut 100 times with a sword. It was not the flashiest spell or the strongest, but it was the simplest and cleanest. It could overcome a shield in short order, so staying in place to cast one was not a smart idea. Harry felt the build-up of magic in 2 of them and he said aloud, "Specular Argentum." At the same moment the 2 knights said, "Bombarda Maxima." A silver mirror-like disc appeared in front of Harry's left and right hands. The overpowered explosion spells did not detonate on contact but were reflected back at the casters. One of the knights cast a shield while the other cast a stunner at Harry. The shield protected one of the pair of knights from the reflected spell, but the other pair had no protection and the spell blew apart the caster's chest. Ping. Stunner resisted? The stunner had no effect on Harry as none of these men were stronger than him one-on-one, so he would have to get hit by at least 2 near consecutive stunners to go down. Before the other pair's shield dropped, Harry had cast his own stunner on the man who failed to shield his partner from the explosion and had been knocked aside himself. Harry rushed to the downed man, dodging the spellfire of the other pair, and before either could revive their colleague, Harry used his abundant strength to stab his knife into the man's chest and left it there before ducking further spellfire and retaliating. 2 more Bombarda Maximas converged at Harry's location, forcing him to jump into the air to avoid the damage from the explosion at his feet. The knights took aim, shouted Crucio, but Harry suddenly dropped faster than possible by summoning an immovable headstone, dragging himself to it instead and dodging the torture curses. Harry threw another expanding cutter sphere at the pair, forcing them to dodge once more while Harry ducked behind another headstone. Harry quietly said, "Inverse Gemini Evanes," and got up to run to the pair's left. What they saw, however, was Harry getting up and running to their right. This spell made his image appear to do the reverse of what he was actually doing while hiding his original, but didn't work on large groups. The pair fired at his reflection while Harry moved behind them and cast 2 more stunners. The reflection wouldn't show Harry casting spells, so they didn't see a spell to dodge, and the pair was dropped before they could understand what had happened. Harry summoned his knife from the other man's chest and stabbed each in the chest as well. The fight had only taken a minute, so Harry ran back to the group attempting to disable his reality bomb. The boss was still on the lookout, but Harry had taken 10 seconds to quickly run around the group and cast another expanding cutter sphere from behind the reality bomb while lying on the ground. From their perspective, the sphere would cover Harry's position so they wouldn't see him directly. The lookout had the same talent as Dumbledore for sensing magic, though not as good. This proved to be a disadvantage as Harry's magic was undetectable and he only saw the spell when it was about halfway to his position. The man grabbed his nearest partner and dragged him back just as the sphere passed through the reality bomb and the knight working on it out of arm's reach. 2 seconds before contact, Harry had pulled out another unstable spell grenade and banished it at the group just as the reality bomb and the other knight got chopped into fine pieces. Harry's cutting sphere's cutting spells were condensed enough to cut the parts of the reality bomb without further destabilizing it, thus was one of the ways to safely disarm it. Though that was specifically because Harry built it that way. It had to be chopped into multiple pieces near instantaneously to stop the reaction from going critical. Harry's final grenade went off and sent forth a massive red wave, the result of 30 stunners reaching critical mass. Vinny, captain of the Knights of Walpurgis, released the man he had just pulled back and apparat away with a loud pop as the red wave passed through his colleague. Harry didn't waste time and charged forth to stab the man in the heart, one last time. The silver dragons above Harry roared victoriously and they each vanished one by one. Not a single Dementor could be found. Harry paused and checked the immediate area. Pausing was great for scouting. Harry confirmed there was no 8th or 9th Knight of Walpurgis hiding around, and Harry decided it was fine to collapse into the frozen landscape. He couldn't recover while pausing, but he could still mentally decompress and go over what had happened. Sirius told him that in a free-for-all, the most common spells used by professionals were stunners, cutting curses, and blasting curses or reductos. It wasn't due to preference. Stunners were some of the easiest spells to spam over and over, and it was not difficult to cast non-verbally. Someone at Sirius's level could cast 3 stunners in 2 seconds, while a Bombarda would take a second and a half. Stunners were also the second fastest traveling spell behind Expelliarmus, while spells like Reducto and Bombarda traveled much slower. Cutting curses were slower than a stunner but had a wider area of effect and were still faster than Bombarda and were easier to cast non-verbally. Harry could cast his original cutting curse spells non-verbally, but they traveled very slowly. Spells he was not as proficient like Magic Mirror and Reverse Run he could only cast through a proper incantation, so he could only cast those with the right timing. Harry unpaused and heard the sound he had been waiting for. Ping. Quest complete. Survive Hogwarts. Reward, Philosopher's Stone, Rite of Conquest perk. Next was the sensation Harry had been expecting since Voldemort got eaten. The exotic energy of every corpse converged onto Harry. However, it was more than that. Energy Harry felt could only be soul energy descended from the sky, and Harry's body greedily devoured it all. You have gained a level. Harry figured the soul energy was from the slain Dementors. Harry didn't even know they had soul energy, but that may have been because it had been so tainted he couldn't feel it. After being purified through Patronus Dragon Fire, however, it was fine to absorb and very filling. Harry leveled up 5 times and was now at level 130. Harry went to loot the bodies of the Knights of Walpurgis and the Death Eaters. The latter no longer looked like Harry, even though they died under polyjuice. The potion broke down in their corpse once Harry's blood vanished, and they all returned to their normal appearances. Once Harry moved to loot a corpse, a pop-up appeared. Invoke Rite of Conquest? Yes, no. Harry selected yes, and another pop-up appeared of the man's items which Harry could select to take from. Harry could select loot all, but that would take the man's robe too, which would be a bit much. Some of the corpses had something special in the loot box. For example, when Harry looted from the Elder Malfoy's corpse, he saw the ring of the head of the House of Malfoy. When Harry selected it to take, he got another pop-up. You have defeated the head of the House of Malfoy in mortal combat initiated by the other party. You can take this ring to Gringotts to apply for Rite of Conquest and take possession of the assets of the House of Malfoy. Now Harry understood the Rite of Conquest perk. In addition to the nice loot box, it also let Harry take the wealth of those he killed. If they tried to kill him first and were the head of a house anyways, Yup, Hell Mode had fabulous prizes. While Harry was busy looting the riches of Britain from various corpses, the corpse of Vinny, the captain of the Knights of Walpurgis, was floating in the vacuum of space. His body would eventually crash into the windshield of an alien ship on its way to Earth, but that's a story for another time. Harry took out another spell grenade and banished it into the air. He had no idea if this would actually work, but it was worth a shot. A blinding white light with the power of 70 Reparo Maxima spells filled the graveyard, and the destroyed land moved as if time was reversing. After about 10 seconds, the damaged ground, the destroyed headstones, and even the air itself returned back to how it was. Although Voldemort had placed a muggle-repelling charm in the graveyard and magic spells were mostly invisible to non-magicals, the sound of Harry's guns and the explosions of his grenades could still attract the wrong sort of attention, so he wanted the place looking normal. Luckily, the cold malevolence imposed on the air itself by the swarm of Dementors had been enough to convince the residents of Little Hagglidden to stay indoors, so though some noticed it, no one wanted to investigate and it would soon be forgotten by most. Harry took a radio out his inventory and switched to a specific frequency before speaking. Harry to Hermione. Come in, Hermione. A moment later the radio almost shouted back, Harry, what happened? Madam Bones was ported here stunned and says no one has been able to get there. Head over to Ms. Bones please, I don't want to have to repeat myself over and over. The anti-teleportation wards will be down in a minute or so. A few moments later Hermione said, she's here, Harry. Mr. Potter, what happened? Some of your Aurors were swapped for Death Eaters who stunned you in the back and politely asked where did I misplace Voldemort. I don't know what happened to the men they swapped with. Are you alright? Asked Hermione this time. You know me, Hermione. 7 elite Death Eaters stronger than Professor Flitwick and 100 Dementors is just another Friday for me. I am sorry to say, however, that Azkaban will need different guards in the future. Madam Bones, the anti-teleportation wards are down now, so you can come back to collect the bodies. The Muggle-repelling ward has another 15 minutes or so before falling. 10 seconds later Ms. Bones, her 4 Aurors, Hermione, Sirius Black, Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Flitwick operate in. Harry figured 5 of those seconds consisted of Hermione convincing the others to take her. Harry had already vanished the scrapped parts of his reality bomb, so other than a pile of bodies and a large cauldron, the signs of the battle were completely gone. Dumbledore did several spells which reacted to the air and made him smile. He did not sense that the air was thick with Harry's magic as it was undetectable, but he used a few spells Harry recognized had different effects in magic-rich environments, so he was able to indirectly determine the scale of magics Harry cast. Though he'd never be able to identify the caster if he didn't already know. Amelia Bones found the 4 corpses of the Knights of Walpurgis and confirmed, though wearing aura robes, they were not the Aurors she intended to bring with her. Only a few moments of careful introspection and knowing what to look for allowed her to identify the Confundus charm that had been subtly cast on her, preventing her from noticing earlier. No one had to tell her how skilled that meant these knights had been. She asked, Potter, where is the 7th? Harry smiled. The anti-teleportation ward would allow someone to force their way through it if they didn't care where they were going. This, however, is a trap, and anyone forcing their way through would be catapulted into space. I think the one who called himself the captain said his name was Vinny. He's not coming back. She asked a few more questions about the ward, but Harry evaded them. He couldn't exactly tell her they were activated and powered by blood. One benefit to such a design was that the activator was the only one who could pass through the wards after they were set. Once the corpses were taken away and the location swept to confirm there was no dangerous residue, Amelia's patience finally ended and said, Okay, Mr. Potter, now tell me what happened here. Harry shrugged and said, I can answer that question only if you leave it out of your report and preferably make something up. That is not for you to decide, Mr. Potter. Harry returned her glare with a calm demeanor and said, In that case, I was stunned when I arrived, woke up, got stunned again, and woke again. I have no idea what happened. Have a nice day. Sirius had to hold himself back from laughing, and the other teachers rolled their eyes at the obvious lies. Amelia wasn't going to take no for an answer so easily and said, There are hundreds of witnesses through that muggle glass that told a different story, Mr. Potter. Harry smiled that she intended on using that approach of all things. Harry retorted, So you're saying that because someone saw someone who looked like me, it was definitely me? I suppose I'm guilty then, unless there is some way for someone other than me to look like me. A bark of laughter made their way through Sirius's covered mouth, which earned another glare for Amelia. Professor McGonagall had filled in Amelia of the details of the show up to the footage being cut, so it didn't take a moment for Amelia to realize Harry's defense was at least as tight, if not tighter, than those who once claimed to be under the Imperious curse. Only the wind passing through the headstones broke the silence that followed, and eventually the head of the DMLE relented. Fine, Mr. Potter. What happened here won't get out. So what did happen? Harry turned to Sirius and Hermione for a moment and smiled. Simple, I stopped holding back. Chapter 16, Chapter 16 From Legend to Myth. Harry told them a story he had come up with long ago. When he awoke the prior year after his missing year, he had knowledge he didn't have before. One piece of knowledge was a spell that connected to a pocket space like a moleskin pouch with an undetectable extension charm placed on it. Revealing his inventory this way made the rest of the story much easier to tell. He told them he'd memorized the Potter, the Black, and the Hogwarts library. He also admitted to killing the basilisk and finding Salazar Slytherin's study, and with his ability to crunch information at impossible speeds, he quickly learned most of the magics in the world. Sirius picked up from there and explained how he had spent every day sparring with Harry and every weekend prior to Easter break sparring with him. He fully admitted that Harry was stronger than he was now and gave details into his godson's terrifying growth rate. Hermione explained Harry's fascination with Muggle tech and firearms and how he had been incorporating them into his magic to make himself stronger. McGonagall and Flitwick were both astounded that Harry had been the one teaching Hermione and Neville, as they both thought it was the other way around. Harry also told them of how Snape helped him with the aerosol polyjuice and the gunpowder, as Harry would not have been able to get a perfectly working version of either before the third task without his help. Dumbledore was a little skeptical at this until Harry told him that Snape obliviated himself afterwards and left Harry a letter to give him. That brought back the twinkle in the headmaster's eyes and brought a lot of respect for the teacher from McGonagall and Flitwick. The letter itself couldn't be opened without revealing it was opened, as it was sealed with Snape's magic. But when Harry put it into his inventory, he could tell the content without opening it. Thankfully there were no details, even coded ones, about Harry's abilities. Harry had told Snape he would leave the magical world after this year, so Snape didn't care that much. The letter itself basically told Snape that he had a large part in the taking down of that monstrous bastard, and with his assistance to the Potter brat, a certain debt had been repaid in full with interest. Harry was instructed not to give the letter to him unless the dark mark was gone. He'd already confirmed on the bodies of the Death Eaters that the mark had in fact vanished. Harry gave the details of the battle, though told them the reality bomb was a fake. The lack of a twinkle in Dumbledore's eye and the fear in Hermione's told him neither believed that. Everyone was shocked at the power of the spell grenades and Harry's patroness. He demonstrated his normal-sized one when they doubted him that it was a dragon. Harry had decades of happy memories from his time spent on the other side, so his patroness was of course sufficiently powerful even before cramming 20 of them inside a grenade. At the end, Amelia had 2 questions. Mr. Potter, why does it sound like you have been preparing for this for the last year as if you knew about it, and why don't you want anyone to know it happened? To answer the first, I think someone told me a prophecy or something. I don't remember hearing it, but I knew before attending classes I would have to face Voldemort, a basilisk, and Dementors. Once I heard about the Triwizard Cup, I knew I'd be entered into that too, as if I knew it all along and forgot about it until then. Not exactly the most believable, but it was a better answer than the truth. Harry continued, as for the anonymity thing, that's an easy one. I'm famous enough as it is. I'd prefer to be known for something other than magic, which was why I used as little as possible in the tasks. Voldemort and the Knights of Walpurgis could have killed me if they didn't look down on me so much, and that was intentional. I don't want people to know how powerful I am, or I'll end up like Dumbledore and everyone will look to me to solve their problems instead of solving their own. A few heads turned to Dumbledore, who was nodding sagely. As long as people think I can't use strong magic, they won't bother me, and if they target me they won't get what they're expecting. That's why I want you to make up something for what happened. Maybe they tried another ritual which failed and they all died. Throw the word classified around like it's no one's business and write something half believable. McGonagall spoke up at this point, but Harry, even if you don't show your strength, people will think you are powerful regardless. Wouldn't it be better if they knew the truth? Harry shook his head. That might make sense to her, but she was missing a few points. Harry answered, Professor, I'm not returning to Hogwarts after the summer. I intend to tell everyone the magic world is too dangerous for me, so I'm leaving it. Flitwick looked shocked at this and said, But Mr. Potter, they'll snap your wand. Sirius couldn't take it anymore and burst out laughing. McGonagall's reproachful glare only made him laugh harder. Dumbledore said, It was revealed during the weighing of wands that Harry's wand is an ordinary stick. He has been using wandless magic since school started while pretending otherwise. Other than myself, Ollivander, Mr. Bagman and the other champions, no one else knows this. Sirius held his laughter for a moment so he could catch the expression on the professor's and Amelia's face before breaking out into another cackling fit. Harry added over his godfather's laughter, Due to my placement in the Triwizard Tournament, I've been an adult since October 31st. And due to the tournament, I am not required to sit for my exams this year. This means I can leave without doing any exams and not come back. On paper, it will look like I gave up magic and left. A few questions and another check through the graveyard later, the group left just as the Muggle-repelling charm fell. What no one knew and Harry wouldn't find out for many years was that his broadcast was not just received by Sirius Black's monitors. Another very discreet intelligence agency recorded all airwave transmissions, and a certain man with an eye patch would be watching the video a few weeks later and recognize a certain orange tabby cat. Harry hadn't thought to encrypt the transmission, but that was a problem for another day. The story they had come up with was thought up by Hermione and not too different from the truth. Hermione came up with the idea that Harry just used more tech toys to defeat the Knights of Walpurgis and didn't use any magic at all. Harry was fine with this as he didn't mind a reputation for magic tech. Amelia gave a statement to the press that Voldemort had placed Harry in the tournament and that Harry defeated him with Muggle tech and some clever potions. She then said that Harry will be withdrawing from the magical world to pursue his interest in Muggle tech. She did however say that Harry's wand would not be snapped but taken into custody in case Harry ever wished to return to the magical world. The last part she added in humor as it would get a lot of politicians off her back. The results of the scoring for the final round was almost funny to Harry. Most of the judges gave very few points to Cedric and the others, and they hadn't done much before Harry ended the tournament. Igor Karkaroff, the former Death Eater and headmaster of Durmstrang Institute, ended up giving Cedric 10 points, which, with the other points given, was more than the 27 points Cedric needed to have the most points at the end, thus winning the Triwizard Cup. Harry guessed Karkaroff just really didn't want a first year to beat his student. In the end, Cedric only had 2 more points than Harry, which caused a lot of controversy with Durmstrang, as the headmaster never awarded Harry a single point yet awarded his own student 10 on each task and Cedric 10 in the end, which was the only reason Harry didn't win. This combined with many other large and small reasons, including the manipulation of the betting polls to finally and once and for all retire the Goblet of Fire and the tournament for all time. Using a few favors, Harry ended up being gifted the goblet himself. He was going to enjoy playing with that. The goblet was worth far more than the 1,000 galleon prize money, and with Cedric on paper as the tournament's winner, Harry would be able to fade from memory in time. Later many would even question his existence, as Dumbledore would remove all records of Harry's schooling as a favor to him, and without any test scores submitted to the Ministry, the legend of Harry Potter would eventually fade into myth. Some would collect the evidence of his story in newspaper clippings, but many of them made less sense than the rumors. They told a story of Harry dying, the world mourning, then Harry magically coming back to life and becoming the 4th champion of a tournament of 3 participants. Further clips told of Harry fighting a dragon without magic, defeating a village of mermen in the bottom of a lake without magic, and defeating Voldemort, who died a decade ago, and all his Death Eaters without magic before Harry Potter himself vanished. Skeeter's articles and their later retractions and the firing of the woman herself made the story even more confusing and ridiculous. The end of the story had Harry winning the tournament, even though the records show Harry never attended Hogwarts and Cedric Diggory won the tournament. Later someone would make a book out of it, and it was the only one written about himself that Harry enjoyed reading. After the tournament, Harry confirmed with Snape that his dark mark was gone and gave the man his letter. Harry stayed there a few moments for the man to read it, and after a short silence the potions professor gave a quiet, "Thank you," and left without another word. Before the end of that day, Harry secretly made his way to Gringotts with the head of family rings and requested to invoke Rite of Conquest. The invocation would allow the family magic within the vault to decide if the conquest was approved. If not, the family magic would strike back and possibly kill Harry. If it worked, the vault would open without the key. The look on the goblin's face when Harry opened vault after vault was priceless. Harry then placed 40% of the gold of Greater Magical Britain in his inventory. Plenty of families also kept grimoires and valuable relics in the vault, and with a few exceptions, Harry took them all. To each family with an heir he left the family ring so it would not die out, and a small amount of coin so they would not suffer that much but would have to work for a living. When the goblins learned Harry would not be transferring the gold into another vault but taking it and leaving Magical Britain, they started making their own arrangements. At first Harry thought they would be upset, but Harry wasn't taking gold that would ever really belong to them, so it made little difference. What it would do was drastically increase the value of the remaining gold in Britain, and the goblins had quite a bit of that. A period of massive deflation would occur, and many things that were not worth much would become more valuable soon, while the price of purchasable items would decrease. Harry's taking of so much gold would actually benefit the economy over time. Even families like the Weasleys would soon find that their meager savings had far more spending power than it used to. Not that he was parting from the goblins forever, no, far from it. Harry intended to slowly convert much of the gold into non-magical currency and attach it to the non-magical identity he had the goblins make for him some time ago. Eventually Harry would invest it and get a matching path, but he knew nothing of investing for now and would intended to slowly filter the money into his own non-magical accounts. The final days of school passed quicker than many liked, and when Harry didn't show up to take the final exams, they knew he was not changing his mind about his decision to leave. Some tried to convince him otherwise, but luckily the Slytherin students were more than happy to demonstrate why Harry wanted to leave by constantly trying to hex him in the back or call him out for what he did to their fathers, etc. When Draco Malfoy eventually got a letter from his mother stating that they were no longer rich, he tried to curse Harry in the Great Hall before the entire student body. Harry blocked the spell with a certain plate he conveniently kept out during dinners, and Draco was suspended for the rest of the year. Harry would later learn from Hermione he did not return to school as his house was sent thousands of magically howling hate mail over the summer, so it was sold and they left Britain. Draco's admission to Durmstrang was denied, so he was homeschooled, but since those not attending school couldn't use a wand until they were 17, he was greatly lacking in magical education and did very little in his life in the years that followed. The red-headed twins had actually bet most of their savings on Harry winning the tournament, which Harry actually felt quite bad about, especially when he learned they intended on opening a joke shop. Harry decided that he needed practice with the business thing before he went big and invested 2,000 galleons into the pair, but told them to wait a year before buying the property as deflation would soon make the gold worth a lot more. This was the pair's 6th year and they barely scratched the surface of the roar, so they had no problem using a year and all the funding they wanted to create and test new products. Harry also introduced them to his godfather and told Sirius he would be their manager. Sirius at first refused responsibility like it was a plague-infested rat, citing that a marauder never seeks responsibility. His tune changed when the twins started bowing at his feet at the recognition of the word. Turns out that the pair had the Marauder's map, which was why they knew when Harry was coming and going. They had no problem giving it to Harry since he told them he wanted to figure out how it worked. To Ronald Weasley, the redhead Harry would play chess with a few times a week. Harry gave him a young owl like he had promised to replace his rat. The redhead made a number of friends including Neville and Hermione, so the owl would see a lot of use over the summer. Harry also gifted Hermione an owl he found in the store. It actually looked very much like his animagus form, but for an owl was colored wrong. Male snowy owls are pure white while females have many brown patches. The owl Harry found was pure white but female. Harry chose this specific owl to give to Hermione because Harry felt it would always be able to find him, meaning they would always be able to stay in touch. Hermione cried at the gift and named her Hedwig after a saintess named in the History of Magic text. A week after school ended, Harry got a business proposition from the goblins. They wanted to start a muggle bank using electronics and Harry's gold, but needed the means to protect electronics from magic. Harry immediately bought over £1,000 worth of business and business law books and spent a mind-numbingly boring amount of time paused going over them all to make sure he wouldn't get screwed, on purpose or inadvertently. A week later and the final papers were signed. The backstory would be that Harry was adopted by a wealthy old family who died and Harry used the old money to open a bank. It would gain traction very slowly to avoid suspicion, but after a few years would have a lot of power. Harry was pretty much the owner with the goblins as partners and employees. Both would have to agree on anything to make a change. The goblins intended to use their own mastery in enchantments to advance Harry's magic shielding arrays. One of the deals written in the contract was that Harry would never disclose or sell his method to anyone else in the future. In exchange for this, they would lend Harry all their books on goblin enchanting and would pass on any advancements they made in his technique. Harry had already told them about Hermione and had gotten her to promise not to teach others as well. Once the last signature was written, Harry finally got what he had been looking for. Ping. Business path has risen to rank 1. Harry returned to the Potter home on High Rock with Goose and spent the next several weeks perfecting his current magic theory while exchanging letters between himself, Hermione, and Dumbledore, who was delighted to exchange theories with. When Harry was bored, he would shift into his owl form and fly around or visit Sirius, who was enjoying his bachelor life. Harry still hadn't figured out how to make the ultimate broomstick, so he stuck with his avian form. One day while flying through London, Harry saw something that made very little sense. He heard the sound of battle coming from an alleyway, yet the sound was muffled by a ward of some kind. When he flew through the ward, he saw magic he didn't recognize being used to fight. Considering he was now one of, if not the foremost expert on magic in Britain, that was odd. The fight consisted of 3 martial artists wearing monk-like robes fighting another man in an eccentric outfit. All parties were using magic, but according to his energy sense, which worked just fine in owl form, it was not exotic energy magic. The 3 monk-like fighters used what was clearly dimensional energy to form constructs, shields, weapons, and energy bolts. The one they fought used what seemed to be a mix of tainted soul energy and tainted natural energy powered magic. The monk-like ones were clearly not wizards, as their combat had as much physical skill as it did energy manipulation. The other party seemed to be a textbook evil magic user and was so stereotypical Harry thought the outfit was a joke. The evil-looking one launched chains of lightning at the monks, who were forced to block the attack. The stereotypical villain shouted, "You think you've trapped me, but it is you who are trapped." Harry sensed 3 points of dense tainted soul energy on the walls behind the man expanding out and witnessed 3 black animal-like monsters emerge from the walls. The closest description Harry could think of was an armored tiger with the head of a wolf. They looked quite vicious and Harry's senses would place them all at about level 100. The monks and the other guy Harry couldn't get a feel for when it came to level, as a person's level was basically energy density according to his senses. When not using dimensional energy actively, the monks had some stored in their bodies which would place them at about level 50. But when they actively used magic, they seemed to absorb and channel external dimensional energy, and their level would spike to 70, 80, or 90 depending on the power of the spell. Harry combed over the tens of thousands of pages of texts in the various grimoires, journals, and historical documents he had. He found 3 results. One referenced a muggle who could use magic and called himself a sorcerer. Another referenced that the only magical in the history of magic to be capable of using dimensional energy was Merlin, who at one point was called the Sorcerer Supreme. Another entry Harry found referred to another branch of inferior magic users the entry didn't bother to name. It stated that they were weaker than wizards and would avoid them. It wasn't much, but at least it was something. The monk-like guys could be sorcerers. What would that make the villain? The skill of the sorcerers was apparent as they used impeccable teamwork to defeat the monsters and knock out the villain. The attack that decided it was cast at what looked like level 150. That was even stronger than Dumbledore. Harry couldn't get a feel for the magic rank as he wasn't familiar with it yet, but it wasn't weak. Harry considered a number of options but decided to go with the direct approach. He flew down to a corner and returned to human form and badly peeked around the corner while making noise. The warrior-like magic users returned to battle stance and charged the corner until they saw it was just a child. Harry said, "That was so cool. Can I learn to do that?" The one of African descent who cast the final attack gave a very quick, "No." Harry's smile instantly changed into horror. The other monks cracked a smile at how fast the kid was rejected and his reaction. Harry asked, "But why?" "Sorcery is not for children," was his answer. One of the others said, "If the ward didn't keep you out, you may be able to learn one day. Go home, study hard, listen to your parents, and eat your vegetables until then." The other 2 looked like they were trying to not laugh at how responsible that sounded. Harry scowled and said, I've already read everything, I'm strong for my age, my parents are dead, and if you don't want to teach me, I'll teach myself. The one who hadn't spoken said, if your parents are dead, who do you live with? Harry pulled out his wallet which contained over £600 and showed the group. He said, I live on my own and I take care of myself. The one who first rejected him said, the answer is still no. The others seemed to want to say something but gave up. This one seemed to be their boss. Harry felt the energy around him converge into this man and focused his senses on the man completely. Harry felt the external dimensional energy converge on this man's spiritual heart where there was already a small amount of dimensional energy stored which matched the biorhythm of the life and soul energy the man possessed. It was only because Harry absorbed so much purified soul energy from the slain dementors he could sense the latter. Once the dimensional energy reached this converging heart energy, it seemed to become controllable and was passed through the man's arm and molded with intent as it reached the man's hand. In that moment Harry realized why he could never control dimensional energy. Every person had dimensional energy inside them but weren't conscious of it. These men were. This man in particular awakened the energy and concentrated it into his heart. Within this man's spirit was a small amount of dimensional energy which matched the energy signature of the soul and life energy the man possessed. Harry had lots of dimensional energy inside him as he often absorbed it during battle meditation to level up. However, it was in fact out of sync with his life force and soul energy. Harry realized he was subconsciously fighting it which in turn prevented him from allowing dimensional energy to flow through him. He always thought of it as an external energy, something that was not a part of him. Of course he couldn't control something that was not a part of him. Harry stopped fighting it, he surrendered to it like a fish surrendering to the flow of the river and in doing so the energy changed the very signature of his life and soul while he in turn changed it. Now the dimensional energy that had always been a part of Harry's body matched the signature of his life and soul energy. It was still out of sync with his exotic energy but that was a challenge for another day. All of this happened in the moment the man was casting a spell which would block Harry's memories of this event. When the spell had completed in his hand and shot at his head, Harry grabbed a small piece of the flow of dimensional energy around him and crafted a weak shield from it. The shield shattered and barely managed to block it but it worked. Not that the spell would have had any effect but they didn't need to know that. Harry felt elated that he finally had his first grasp of non-exotic energy-based magic. This was a magic that could be used in the non-magical world without frying every electronic device in the area. Harry looked up to see the shocked faces of the monks and gave a pleased grin before saying, I guess it's not that hard after all. Thanks for the demonstration. If you're not going to teach me, I'll figure it out myself. Have a nice day. Harry then turned and left. Harry heard behind him one of the monks say, Mordo, what just happened? One of the others said, I felt it. In that moment you were casting his body imitated your own, learning on its own. He now has a heart palace like yours. The leader apparently called Mordo said, I felt it too Wong. I will speak with the Ancient One about this. Chapter 17 Learning Magic. Again, Harry gained much from his trip today, even more than those sorcerers thought he did. Harry confirmed that they could sense the dimensional energy Harry absorbed and used, but they couldn't sense Harry's exotic energy or spells cast with it. Harry placed a tracking spell on each of them so he could figure out where they went. Shortly after Harry left he felt them vanish from the area and appear in another part of London. What was interesting was that his tracking spell was purged the moment they arrived at their destination. Harry didn't think it was intentional, more like their destination automatically scrubbed those who arrived even if nothing was sensed. Harry returned to his animagus form and flew to the area and found a large, ancient, 4-story building along a quiet street. Harry had seen this building several times while flying about and always admired the architecture. The reason he initially noticed it was that it was, relatively speaking, built around the convergence of several sources of dimensional energy which Harry could feel flowing through the world. If Hogwarts was built on the location with the strongest concentration of exotic energy, this place had the strongest concentration of dimensional energy. Harry wondered if he looked around the world for other sources of energy would he find other magic users. No, that would probably lead to things that would kill him. Harry also noticed for the first time the location had some of the sturdiest wards he'd ever felt. Their structure was there before, he just hadn't noticed they formed a ward when he first felt them as he wasn't familiar with dimensional energy then. Harry felt that the wards also couldn't see his exotic energy which was pretty cool. They seemed to react to his new dimensional energy, but Harry felt they wouldn't trigger unless he actually cast magic with it or drew in energy from it. This meant the ward would likely go off if he used battle mediation here. Something to think about later. Harry flew beyond the wards and apparat back home. His stats as an owl were the same as a human, which meant he could use wandless magic, apparate, and make use of his physical agility and strength when he wanted. Harry tested this by clocking his flight speed at 600 km per hour, which is about half the speed of sound, about 8 times faster than a normal snowy owl's top speed. Not that he could keep that up for long. Eventually he'd run out of stamina and have to rest or eat to recover it. Harry spent the rest of August practicing with dimensional energy and even asked Dumbledore about it and about sorcerers in general. Dumbledore was most surprised Harry encountered sorcerers, but when he remembered the nature of Harry's undetectable magic, it seemed possible. He explained in a letter what had been explained to him when he was the chief mugwump of the ICW. Sorcerers are kept unknown to witches and wizards and all contact with them is classified. Most common knowledge about them is spread through word of mouth alone. There are more witches and wizards than they are sorcerers, but reports on the strength of sorcerers have always been highly varied. The strangest piece of information is that sorcerers are all muggles, though reports that Merlin was also a sorcerer seem to counter this. Many records of battles between them and witches and wizards show the magic shields of sorcerers were completely ineffective against wizard magic attacks. Yet other reports show the opposite, with wizard magic having no effect against a sorcerer who was able to easily defeat very powerful wizards. What many reports agreed on was that in one way or another sorcerers seemed to be guardians or protectors of some kind. Their power is noted to be capable of far more than wizards, in many cases allowing them to do what would be impossible for a wizard. Dumbledore explained his own theory that sorcerers can use many different forms of energy. Some can only use forms that are weak against wizard magic, while some can use energies which are strong against wizard magic. Harry understood what this implied. Exotic energies could rewrite the laws of reality, but only on a small, specific scale. Apparition itself was a simple means of using exotic energy to literally pierce through dimensional energy and reach another location. Many wizard spells could easily pierce dimensional energy, but there were other energies that were not so easy to fight. That being said, Harry wanted to get the feel of dimensional energy first before he branched off into other forms of energy. By the end of August, Harry's magic path rank had risen to 23, which was around the same rank as Dumbledore. That was also where he met a roadblock. Harry was able to mold dimensional energy into a shield or short sword, but every time it would fizzle out after only a few moments. Harry did his best to imitate that Mordo guy and allowed energy to be absorbed into his body and channeled through the energy already in his body to shape it. Absorbing it wasn't difficult for someone with energy sense. Controlling it wasn't that bad once he figured out the trick to it. The problem was that once he had it shaped and it was outside his body, his control over it slipped and it fizzled out every time. If ambient dimensional energy was water, the dimensional energy inside him tuned to his life and soul was ice. Absorbing ambient energy into the ice would allow Harry to freeze it into a shape and use that shape. But a few moments after it left the body, the ice returned to water and Harry couldn't figure out how to stop it from melting. He was trying to figure out what to do when he got a new notification. Ping. New quest, back to school. Get accepted as a student in the London branch of the Sanctum Sanctorum. Harry immediately opened his map and confirmed the quest destination, the Sanctum Sanctorum, was in fact that building he saw earlier. Yep, that was the one. After making 100% sure he wouldn't get a hell mode pop up again, he made his decision. Harry wrote a few letters to various individuals and packed his things. Goose, we're going to another magic school. This one has sorcerers instead of wizards. Goose responded mentally, you're just looking for more trouble again, aren't you? Harry smiled and said, you know me so well. Hell mode or not, Harry doubted he would get bored. Harry purchased a new wardrobe of plain clothes the monks would likely be fine with and filled a suitcase with them along with 2 towels and a new toothbrush. He got a P.O. box and set all mail owls to forward to the goblins who would mail the actual letters to his P.O. box in the future. After making Potter Manor vanish again, Harry apparatted with Goose and his suitcase a few blocks from the place and walked up from the street. It wasn't on a large property in a gated-off area he'd have to sneak into. It was actually on a side street down a dead-end alley across from a park. Something he found funny was that his own crossing of the ward near the building didn't do much, but the ward seemed very interested in Goose. It didn't directly reject the flirkin, but it did seem to go over Goose's intention with a fine-tooth comb. Harry had to stop himself from cackling, as what may have been the most powerful, the most advanced ward Harry had ever encountered was now determining that his cat intended to spend as much time as she could, sleeping, and lying down in sunbeams. Once the ward confirmed Goose's intention to seek sunbeams to lay in was not dangerous, it stopped bothering the flirkin. Harry directly knocked on the front door and waited about 3 minutes before someone answered. It was not someone he saw from the group earlier and was wearing a suit instead of a monk's robe, but Harry still felt the presence of a large amount of dimensional energy in the man. The doorman looked at Harry carrying a suitcase in one hand and a pet carrier in the other and said, "Can I help you?" Harry smiled and said, "I came to learn magic." The man said, "I'm sorry child, but you have come to the wrong place." Before he could close the door, Harry said, "Tell me, this isn't a place where magic can be learned and taught." "I'm sorry, but you are not expected." Harry said, "Wait, so you only let people you expect in? How is that fair? I didn't know I was supposed to be expected." The man was far more confused than Harry was. He actually recognized the boy as Wong had told him of their encounter the prior month. The Ancient One was consulted and stated the boy would not return. Yet here he was. Never in the man's life had he known the Ancient One to be wrong. Harry continued to stand there holding the heavy-looking suitcase and pet. After considering the fact that the sanctum let him through, he figured the child was not dangerous and said, "You may come in, but you'll have to wait. There is someone I must speak with." Harry took a step in and said, "Thank you. My name is Harry Potter. This is Goose." "Greetings, Harry Potter. My name is Sol Rama, protector of the London branch of the Sanctum Sanctorum." Harry was escorted to a chair and proceeded to wait. Sol quickly walked up to the 3rd level, which had portals to the other sanctums and camartage. He entered the latter and made his way to the room of the Ancient One before knocking. "Come in." The bald woman greeted Sol but was a bit confused as to why he was here. He said, "Ancient One. The boy Master Mordo spoke of. The one you said would not be seen again. He had come to the London Sanctum and asked to learn magic." It was then that Sol saw something few in living memory had ever seen on the Ancient One's stoic face. She was surprised. Truly, she asked. And I did not see it. It seems there are still things I cannot see. She got up and walked out of her room to the portals with Sol following behind. Only a few minutes after Sol had left Harry on the bench, he had returned with a young-looking bald woman in tow. However, Harry felt her presence was heavier than Dumbledore and the resurrected Voldemort combined. She was further above them than they had been above Harry on his first day at Hogwarts. Harry felt half a dozen different types of energy within her. The arrangement was off though. The strongest concentration of energy was some type of dark energy, while the others seemed to be arranged around it to balance the dark energy out. She noticed his attention and said, "Hello, child. I am called the Ancient One." Harry said, "Hello, I am called Harry, though I don't need to shave. I am the godson of one called Sirius, though he will deny being serious with every breath." The woman smirked at the gentle glib that her title didn't match her appearance. This encounter was a first for her since her ascension to Sorcerer Supreme. It was her first time meeting someone she didn't know she would meet. For centuries she had been using a tool to see into her own future, so she pretty much knew everyone she was going to meet from then until the day she died. She never once saw Harry though. When Mordo and Wong spoke of a child who seemed to be a natural at the mystic arts, it confused her as she never saw someone like that using the Eye of Agamotto. She convinced herself it was a one-time anomaly, and since she never saw such a student train in Camartage, she believed the child would never cross paths with them again. Yet she was wrong. Even her most recent viewings of her future lacked this person. Why? For the first time in centuries she found something she was unsure about. That wasn't a bad thing though. She picked up the amulet hanging around her neck and looked into the future with it. Doing so would let her see a conversation before it happened. She could then instead have a different conversation and see that. In this way she could have many first conversations with someone and learn much about them without giving much away about herself. However, for the child it didn't work. When she looked into the future, the child wasn't there. She couldn't tell what he said, and the future she saw didn't have her asking any questions or hearing any answers. This child was somehow shielded, or invisible from the perspective of the future. Whatever gave this child such a gift was even more powerful than the Eye of Agamotto, which was powered by an infinity stone. That was both fascinating and disturbing. Harry simply saw her pick up her necklace, frown, then look back at Harry and ask, "So tell me, not Harry, godson of the not serious Sirius, why do you wish to learn magic?" Harry smiled that she got his bad joke and said, "2 reasons. First, I like to help people and learning here will definitely be good. The second is that there is a 100% chance I'll need it later in life, since there is no chance I am going to have a boring life." "What makes you say that?" She was honestly interested in his own opinion on the matter. It was certainly unusual for a child to be so certain their future required learning the mystic arts. "Well, for one, I have what I'm pretty sure is a familiar bond with this, not a cat." The Ancient One looked at the small case carrying the orange cat and for the first time sensed that it was most certainly not a cat. It looked like a cat of course and seemed to behave like a cat, but this creature had a naturally occurring pocket dimension within that she would not have noticed if she didn't look for it. She'd never seen a living creature like this before, not on this plane anyways. On further examination she could determine it did in fact have a bond with the child. It was very strong too. She considered it for a few moments and said, "There are other ways of protecting yourself, you know. Becoming a sorcerer means taking up to duties of defending the realm from those who seek to harm it." Harry shrugged and honestly answered, "Chances are I'll have to do that in the future even if I didn't learn sorcery." The Ancient One was more than a little surprised at how sure of this the child was. She said, "I heard you used some sorcery a month ago. Have you made any progress?" She remembered her amusement when Wong had told her the child's passing remark that he would figure it out himself. As he was asking to learn now, she wanted to see if the boy could be embarrassed at the fact he likely didn't make any progress. Harry sighed and crafted a short sword from dimensional energy for her to examine. It was made of rust-colored interweaving arrays of light as most dimensional constructs were, and it was cleanly outlined. A moment later it fizzled out and the Ancient One smiled. She said, "A construct needs a small but constant input of dimensional energy to retain its form or it will break down." Harry thought about it for a moment and smacked his forehead. Oh, now it was obvious. He was trying to water a garden by turning the hose off after the water started coming out. Harry focused again, but this time after the construct was made, he continued to refresh it over and over by adding more energy into it. This time the sword stayed solid and did not waver. Harry smiled and said, "Thank you. I feel really stupid now." The Ancient One raised an eyebrow at the remark. For most initiates, surrendering to the energy, absorbing it, directing it, and shaping it were the hard parts. All that Harry had done easily. He just didn't know what to do next. Now she was a bit torn. On one hand, Harry could become a powerful sorcerer. So much skill at such a young age and his potential was higher than her predetermined successor who wouldn't show for another decade or so. On the other hand, if Harry went bad, she wouldn't know until it was too late. However, when was not being able to see a person's future a crime? It was known that Camartage would teach anyone willing to learn, but technically that was only for people who arrived at Camartage themselves, and Harry was still in London. After a moment more of contemplation she said, "You may learn the mystic arts from here, Harry, but only if you pass a test. If you do not, then you may not learn until you are taller than I am. Okay. It wasn't like he had a choice. Besides, his inner Gryffindor wouldn't let him just back away from a challenge. She escorted Harry to the 4th floor where Harry saw numerous items behind glass cases. His senses informed him each contained a masterpiece of arranged energy for a purpose, true artifacts, though he would later learn they called them relics here. She walked him through a door and within was a small ritual room with a sphere that had a gentle white glow on a pedestal. This is the ancient orb of Agamotto, or should I say the original. There is a different one that shares the same name which monitors threats throughout the world in Camartage, but this one predates it and was created by the founder of our order, the first Sorcerer Supreme, Agamotto himself. I want you to place your hand on it. Harry felt the presence of so many types of powerful energy from the orb that he had no means to differentiate what any of it was. Harry didn't mind though and placed his hands on the orb. The Ancient One knew this was highly irregular. The orb could sense the heart and many of the secrets of the person it scanned. It was a tool which allowed one to sense if specific entities were threats, and using it on a potential student was never done. The orb however glowed pure white, signifying a pure heart and pure intentions. The Ancient One saw several images appear within the light, but she only recognized one of them. It was a phoenix. The phoenix to be precise. She also recognized what may have been the source of the child's talent. He was a mutant and seemed to have a pocket space within his soul. There were some other things but she couldn't make heads or tails of them. However, the pocket space would have answered a few questions. The cat had a pocket space as well, so their similarities could have forged the familiar connection. Having a natural pocket space could explain how using dimensional energy was so natural for him. Okay, you can remove your hands. Harry did so and the orb stopped glowing. Even the orb couldn't detect Harry's exotic energy, so the Ancient One only saw the dimensional energy within Harry as well as small amounts of natural energy which he sometimes used battle meditation off. The Ancient One said, "If you are serious about defending the realm, then I welcome you as a student." Harry said, "Thank you, but I think you have me confused for my godfather. I'm Harry, he's serious." She rolled her eyes and escorted him back to collect his things. She noticed he was surprised at the portals she led him through, but not that surprised. "So tell me about yourself, Harry." "Well, I can, but only if you promise not to tell others. I don't want others to know how much of a trouble magnet I am, at least until they figure it out themselves." She smiled at this and said, "Very well. I will not tell others of your past." Harry felt a field of energy he didn't recognize and figured it was monitoring the conversation. Best guess? Lie detector. He certainly knew how to have fun with those. "Well, my full name is Harry James Potter. I turned 12 on July 31st. I was born to a witch and wizard who were members of a counter-terrorism strike force. They got betrayed by a rat and both were killed by a terrorist leader, Halloween of 1994. I spent the next 9 years living in a cupboard under the stairs of my aunt's house. I died in 2003 and came back to life in 2004, don't ask what happened. I spent last year going to magic school where I killed a basilisk, challenged a nesting dragon, defeated a newly resurrected immortal Dark Lord, and killed 24 of his evil fanatic followers along with 100 dementors. I've also just about memorized every text of wizard magic that exists and I'm looking to branch out." The Ancient One stopped at the third sentence and grew more and more serious after each one. She had to double-check that her spell to ensure it was indeed functioning properly, because if it was, then he was telling the truth. She looked back at him and said, "You're a wizard, Harry." Harry nodded and said, "I guess. Not sure. Haven't been quite sure of what I am after the coming back to life thing." She asked, "Are you aware you are a mutant?" "Yeah, I was told no wizard ever awoke the X gene without dying first, and I just happened to win the genetic lottery. Though I was told the hand of others were involved. I see now where your confidence in encountering trouble comes from. Now, did you actually kill 100 dementors or did you drive them away?" Harry wasn't surprised she knew what a dementor was and said, "Find a spot where there is no one around for 20 miles and I'll show you." She smirked at the challenge and waved her hand in a circle which caused sparks of dimensional energy to follow the path of her hand. From Harry's energy sense, it was like she was twisting space into a tunnel, though there were other processes Harry didn't understand yet. A moment later the sparks formed a circle which turned into a portal. Harry followed her through it into the Sahara Desert, the hottest place Harry had ever been. He then took a Patronus grenade from his inventory and lightly banished it a few dozen meters away. The grenade went off and the massive silver dragon materialized. Harry was paying very close attention to the Ancient One and noticed that the dark energy within her recoiled in the presence of the overpowered dragon Patronus. However, this didn't seem to harm her, which meant that she hadn't synchronized with the dark energy and it hadn't synchronized with her, thus she lacked the taint of darkness. It was an odd arrangement that seemed more trouble than it was worth. The Ancient One was once more surprised. She could sense that space around the dragon was being actively purified through the sheer force of positive emotions, light, love, and happiness. However, she could not feel the dragon itself. She realized with certainty that Harry's wizard magic was invisible, even the orb of Agamotto didn't show it. If Harry hadn't told her, she would not have known. She understood the implications right away. Harry was trusting her with this. She said, "Thank you for showing me this, Harry. I won't speak of it to others. I will however remind you that most of the masters of Camartage would recognize wizard magic if they see it, even if they can't sense it." Harry nodded and said, "I've already got a lot of practice in wizard magic. I'm not here to practice that. Indeed, though if you ever need a place to practice away from the eyes of others, come find me." Ping. Quest complete, back to school. Reward, sling ring perk. Harry wondered why the quest hadn't pinged yet, though the so-called Ancient One already told him he passed the test. Unless, another test. If he lied or hid too much, she may not have trusted him and may have held back in his teachings, or worse, sabotaged them. That being said, every single thing Harry told her was things known by others. If she investigated it herself and put some effort into it, she could have learned it all, so there was no point in holding back. It was the same as training under Sirius. Telling his godfather he was weaker than he actually was would not have helped in making him stronger. Chapter 18. Chapter 18. Welcome to Camartage. The Ancient One opened up another portal and returned to the location from before. She said, if you are already learned in magic, do you have a specific branch of interest? Harry nodded and said, before I answer, what do you know of my mutation? There is still plenty about it even I don't get. There was much that eluded me as well. But I could see that you have a pocket dimension within you that can store objects and energies. Harry was somewhat thankful his body's status as a stable obscurial was not discovered. His actual mutation kept his obscurus form the same as his human form, which was what allowed him to gain levels and revive after death. The inventory seemed to be an add-on like the pause function and menu. However, he had no problem with people thinking his inventory was his mutant power for now. Harry said, I call it my inventory. Anything I put inside it becomes a part of me but separate from me. I also somehow gain a complete understanding of whatever I place in there. If I place a book in there, I have access to all that is written as if I memorized the image and text of every page. I can also gain an understanding of how something works if I place it in there. Harry waited a few moments for the Ancient One to understand the implications before he continued. Because of this, I like to place technology and magic items in my inventory to figure out how they work. I like to make things which have been called artifacts. That spell grenade I used earlier had the power of 20 Patronus charms stuffed into it, which forced the magic to condense into a critical mass before exploding out. The Ancient One could easily see how useful and how dangerous such an ability could be. It also allowed her to recall what Wong had told her. She said, Wong told me you said to him, I've read everything. And earlier you said you've memorized every wizard magic. How many books do you have in that inventory at the moment? Not as many as I used to. Memorizing information from a book is much easier when it is in my inventory. But I don't forget what I've memorized, so if the book was borrowed I return it after memorizing it. Harry took a breath before saying, so, because of my inventory, I've become interested in the branch of enchanting and artifact creation. I recently got all the books on goblin enchanting, so I want to further my study into that. The Ancient One was curious how Harry had gotten enchanting tomes from the goblins, as they were known for never disclosing their methods. More than a few relics in the sanctum were forged by goblins, so she knew the quality of their work. The only reason they allowed it was because Harry promised never to share it, and if he ever broke that promise, all the gold he possessed would be forfeited to the goblins and he would become their employee for the remainder of his days. She said, artifact creation requires precise control, a structured mind, a thorough understanding of magic, and a lot of imagination. I can see why you would be interested, but the truth of the matter is that artificers are few and far between in all of recorded history. There hasn't been one in the sanctum for centuries, and most of the well-known ones of the past are never human. Why do you think that is? Because humans aren't strong enough. She shook her head. Not quite. It is because humans are not long-lived enough. The amount of time the true masters have put into the study and practice of their craft far exceeds a human's lifetime. Even for the humans who are long-lived through various means and gifts, few if any would be interested enough in artifact creation to devote themselves to it enough to reach the skill of the ancient masters. Oh, he really couldn't think of another response. A few sorcerers in training noticed Harry being escorted by the Ancient One through the foyer. According to Harry's map, the portal had taken them somewhere in the mountainous region of Asia. He'd have to explore a little for his map to fill out and get more details. The Ancient One found the one she was looking for and said, Caecilius, there is someone I'd like you to meet. After a quick introduction and request of the man, the Ancient One left the pair to their own devices. The man called Caecilius was also a British citizen and more than happy to show his fellow countrymen around. He said, you are by far the youngest disciple I have ever seen here. Harry said, I think there was a question there, but I'm not sure I heard it. Caecilius smiled wryly and said, we all have a reason to be here. I am here for truth. Some are here for healing or strength. I cannot think of a reason for one so young as yourself to be here. Oh, that. Well, I just happen to love magic and I figured I could learn it here. I also like helping people and magic will probably help with that. The fellow British national frowned disapprovingly. Magic is not something that should be sought on a whim. Maybe, Harry answered. Caecilius showed Harry around the temple and the notable features of each building. Mediation rooms, library, cafeteria, and living quarters. He told Harry that evening practice would begin in an hour and if he wished to start his training it would be wise to observe. The manager of the living quarters gave Harry a room number that would be his sleeping quarters for his stay. It was larger than he thought, but that could have just been because he was small. It has a small shower, a bed, a table, and even a window. Harry set his stuff down there and let Goose out of her carrying case. Harry set a litter box and bowls for food and water in the space below his bed along with a charmed pet bed that stayed warm. Harry also used transmutation magic to reshape the bottom of his door into a cat door. Although transmutation was far more difficult than transfiguration, it was permanent so the door would not change back. Goose filled herself with water and promptly used the cat door to leave and begin the investigation of her new surroundings. And lastly, Harry cast a powerful security and locking charm on the door. What made it useful was that people wouldn't even know it was locked with magic, as the magic he used to cast it was undetectable. Harry was surprised they didn't have any robes for him, but it was more of a didn't have any robes in his size thing than not having anything at all. Harry couldn't transmute clothing very well, and using transfiguration would saturate the clothes in exotic energy, which had its own problems. Luckily the simple clothes he bought were acceptable and he would have his own robes in a week. Harry returned to the spot Caecilius told him would have evening practice and found that several disciples were sparring already. Harry sensed Mr. Grumpy's approach from behind him and set his hand on Harry's shoulder. Harry was tempted to try a judo throw but was too short to make it work and he never practiced it before. Mr. Grumpy, or Mordo as he was called, seemed disappointed Harry hadn't flinched. Harry said, "We meet again, Mr. Grumpy. I'm Harry, by the way. And what, pray tell, are you doing here, child?" "Well, Mr. Grumpy, I was taking my cat for a walk. Have you seen him, by the way? Orange tabby cat, about 218 years old, shoots terrifying tentacles from its mouth. Her name is Goose. Think you're funny, do you? This is no place for a child. I can tell. All the no children allowed posters really convinced me. I supposed I should be on my way. Do you know the bus fare for a ride from here to London?" The man took a deep breath and shook his head. He was not oblivious to the fact that Harry wouldn't be here unless he was allowed to be here. He just didn't like those who didn't take training seriously and loathed those who relied on others to protect themselves. Children usually fit both criteria and he wanted to see how easily Harry got scared. Suffice to say, he was impressed. No flinch, not backing down and even standing his ground when directly confronted. "If you truly intend to learn here, child, then you must understand that you will fight. If you are not strong enough when that day comes, you will die." Mordo kept his hand on Harry's shoulder and felt his heart rate. What he discovered surprised even him. There was no reaction. No fear, no nervousness. It was as if Harry was being informed of something as mundane as the weather. Harry said, "That is true whether I learn here or not." Still no increase in pulse. Mordo couldn't determine lies though magic like the Ancient One could, but he had his own tricks. He could sense and if he needed, draw in energy from others during physical contact. With his hand on Harry's shoulder he was confident he would feel if he was lying or if he was genuine. "Very well, Harry. I am Carl Mordo. When receiving my instructions here you will address me as Master Mordo." Harry turned to face him and gave a polite bow. "Thank you, Master Mordo." He released his hand from Harry's shoulder and nodded. He had at least confirmed he did not lack in resolve. He was also able to clearly see the child's aptitude as Harry already had a heart palace that looked far stronger than it should considering it was only a few months old. The heart palace technique was both the most difficult and most rewarding form of energy control. Until now, the only current practitioners were himself and his teacher, the Ancient One. The main reason why he was so skeptical was that, in a sense, Harry was too good to be true. Mordo believed that the enemies of sorcerers were the enemies of balance, and sorcerers needed strength to kill them. Harry was talented and young and perhaps some decades in the future would become a strong sorcerer to protect the balance and natural order of the world. Only time would tell. Once the practice session began, Harry sat to the side and watched. Mordo and the one called Wong would walk through the rows of acolytes rating their progress and giving advice when needed. The main practice each day was feeling out and controlling dimensional energy. Harry determined at that point that the energy sync trick he stole off Mordo was only used by Mordo and the Ancient One. Through his senses he felt that the trainees didn't have a small piece of dimensional energy that synchronized to the signature of their life and soul. The other masters did seem to have an accumulation of dimensional energy within they could use to control external energy, but it was an indirect control instead of a direct control. They would simply keep practicing with the hope that some energy would stay in their body as they practiced with it. Harry thought the way Mordo did it was a good trick and wondered why it wasn't taught more often. He had no idea that the Ancient One used her foreknowledge to determine whether or not a student would be capable of learning it or not beforehand. If not, they were not taught it. If they could learn it, they were taught that method and that method only. The Ancient One thought only Mordo and her successor Stephen Strange would ever master the Heart Palace, but she was pleased to be wrong. After asking a few questions, Harry had something of a game plan. This place not only taught magic but martial arts which incorporated magic. He didn't want to be noticed so easily, so he would spend whatever would be a normal amount of time practicing energy control before finally getting the hang of magic and learning the fun stuff. Until then he would work on his warrior path rank and try to get it to 20. In his spare time Harry decided to work on his enchanting studies and study his new toys. It wasn't just the Goblet of Fire he could analyze. Harry already got into contact with Nicholas Flamel and told him he had his stone. The ancient alchemist told him to keep it but not tell anyone. The letter stated that many different forces, both magical and mundane, had been after him for many years due to that stone, and it was only recently that he asked his best student to look after it for a while so he could have a break. The circumstances, however, convinced him the stone was better left missing, and if no one knew Harry had it, he should keep it that way. He also told Harry he had enough elixir to get his affairs in order and would soon be on his way to the next great adventure. The end of the letter stated that after they died he would leave all his books to Dumbledore and Harry could ask to borrow them if he wanted. That however wouldn't be for a few years, so he had to make do with what he had. The composition of the Philosopher's Stone itself reminded Harry a bit of his spell grenades when they reached critical mass. The arrangement of the exotic energy densities within the stone was like a large amount of spells compressed into critical mass then solidified before it could blow. The critical mass exotic energies would have different properties compared to the energies prior to going critical. However, under no circumstance could Harry carelessly take it out of his inventory. The sheer density of exotic energy would destroy every electronic within 100 feet, and he had been told there were ways of tracking the stone's energy presence. Those ways had been why the Flamels rarely got a moment of peace and why they requested Dumbledore to look after it for a while. Harry even learned that the stone was in Gringotts for a time, and someone tracked the energy of the stone and broke into Gringotts to find it. Luckily it had been moved hours before, but at least now Harry had some understanding of why Dumbledore didn't bother hiding it. The fact that Harry had the stone yet the means to search for it came up with nothing meant that Harry for some reason was able to block the energy presence of the stone. It was only due to this the Flamels decided to let him keep it. Thanks to that, Harry hadn't taken it out even once since he got it. Thankfully he didn't need gold or the elixir of life. And so Harry's days of training began. The first thing he would do each day was enter the library, discreetly place several books into his inventory, then pause and read them all. Few were in English, but many wizard tomes also covered a variety of languages, and Harry had long since mastered most forms of communication, written or otherwise. Once Harry had memorized the contents and gone over them enough, he would unpause and return them to the shelves and pick a book to bring to his room. Unfortunately, the librarian became quite suspicious of him always coming and going, and Harry had to lie and say that he was referencing something from the books he borrowed. The books were part esoteric, part crossword puzzle, and part Reader's Digest. Harry really did enjoy them. Many wizard books read like dictionaries, full of information, and you'll never use 95% of it, while 99.9% of it referenced itself. Much of the information did in fact overlap with what Harry had already learned, which allowed him to cut down on paused time comprehending it. That and the fact that his scholar path broke through to rank 20 allowed him to learn and comprehend what he learned much more smoothly. After a month, Harry figured he watched the forms enough and started participating in the morning and evening exercises. Surprisingly, it did increase his warrior path even though the movements gave him no strain. Though Harry felt the increase in his path rank came not from his own movements but from the observation of the others. Harry used his energy sense to follow the path of channeled energies within the various disciples as they practiced. Through constant observation, Harry was building up his own intuition of how energy traveled through a person's body as they fought, meaning one day he might be able to predict a human's movement before they moved. Sure, he could do it with a dragon or a basilisk, but that was because they were huge and practically saturated with energy. A human is small and the relative energy within was weak, barely noticeable, like a speck of dust on the air. 2 months later, Harry tried battle meditation for the first time since coming to Carmartage. It was awkward. Harry's battle meditation automatically generated foes made of the energy he chose to absorb, which matched his level as long as it was within the range. Harry had obviously chosen to absorb dimensional energy since having more made controlling it a bit easier, and it had a range of level 50 to level 200. Today the monsters oddly enough looked like a green spectral Slenderman. It was creepy as hell, and its arms would often shift between clawed fingers and sword-like appendages. Harry did his best to fight using a sword and shield of dimensional energy rather than something he conjured using wizard magic. Partway through the fight, Harry heard from behind him, "Hello, Harry." Somehow or another the figure of the Ancient One had materialized behind him. Of course, unexplainable situations were no cause for rudeness according to his mother, so he said, "Good evening, Ancient One, how are you?" Harry had to duck under a decapitating slash and strike the monster's knee. The problem with the Slenderman wasn't its durability, fast attacks, or often unpredictable movements. It was his height. It was at least double Harry's height, meaning Harry had no real way to get a headshot without leaving himself vulnerable. The Ancient One responded, "I'm doing very well, thank you for asking. You see, I was meditating in the astral plane and I sensed a minor convergence of dimensional energies, so I thought I'd have a look." Harry used his shield to parry another attack and did a half spin before bashing his shield into the monster's legs, sending it toppling down. Harry said, "I see, did you find anything interesting?" "I did in fact." The dimensional energy seemed to coalesce into a green stranger, an uncommon resident of certain dimensions. They are considered quite dangerous, and many a dimensional traveler has met their end before them. I've never seen one in the astral plane before. Harry used the moment the monster tried to get back up to pierce its side. He could have gone for the head, but that always left him open for a counterattack, while attacking the side forced the monster to guard. Harry said, "I see. That does sound dangerous. What do you think should be done?" She continued observing Harry's fight for another minute or so. Since the monster matched Harry's level, it wasn't something he could really hold much back on. True, he wasn't using wizard magic or his artifacts, but he was looking to grind his path proficiencies, not jump up in level. If he rose in level too fast without ranking up his paths, then one day he would find he was too weak to fight monsters of the same level. After another moment, the Ancient One said, "Well, the situation seems like it will resolve itself without any intervention. On an unrelated note, we haven't spoken since your arrival. Once you have some time, I'd like to invite you for tea." Harry threw his sword into the air, conjured an energy knife, stabbed into the monster's foot and caught his sword before chopping the bound leg off. He said, "I will never refuse an offer to tea, Ancient One." He was British, he liked tea. It was genetic. After a few more moments he killed the creature, which promptly dissolved into energy his body greedily absorbed. Was he pretty sure the Ancient One was watching? Yes, he was sure she was watching. But he couldn't just pretend this didn't happen, so he might as well deal with it. Harry finished his battle mediation and woke in his body. He made his way from his residence into the Ancient One's chambers where the tea was already being poured. Harry sat down respectfully and lifted the cup but waited a breath so he could savor the aroma. Afterwards he took a small sip, then a longer one. Yup, good tea. Harry asked, is that honey? Why yes. Do you like it? Yes, it's very good. She nodded and said, so how have you adjusted so far, Harry? Harry took another sip and answered, it's better than Hogwarts. Why is that? It's probably just me. The teachers were very good at what they taught. Harry thought of Quirrell, Snape, and the ghost professor and added, most of the time. But they never taught me anything I didn't already know. It was too dangerous to ask since I was watched by people who wanted me dead, so it was mostly self-study while I pretended otherwise. I suppose it wasn't the best learning environment for me. The Ancient One nodded. She had in fact done as Harry expected and did her research on Harry Potter. Everything matched what he told her, yet it seemed he left quite a bit out as well. His antics of broadcasting the defeat of the most evil Dark Lord in the magical world's history on a television was certainly unique. The awkwardness of the meeting was harming Harry's preteen soul, so he simply said, so, I'm guessing you want to know what that was. Yes, I would in fact. Would you like to tell me how you generated a being from another dimension composed out of dimensional energy you then absorbed after defeating? Harry considered how to word the answer and after a moment said, I'm not sure how it works, but I've been calling it battle meditation. I can sense energy, but I can't just absorb it. It won't let me. When I meditate, the energy somehow turns into something I can fight. After beating it, I can then absorb the energy. I can choose what energy I absorb, but I have no control over what actually forms. I've been doing this for a while now. You can sense different forms of energy in the world around us. This was surprising and usually impossible. In order to sense a specific form of energy, often you would have to blindly connect to it first and absorb it, and if you got lucky over time and absorbed enough, you'd be able to feel it, then use it to feel the same type of energy around you. If you weren't lucky, you could spend years trying to absorb something you can't even feel and find out you were never absorbing anything to begin with. Most mystics who had formed connections with multiple types of energy strong enough to sense it did so through making contact with the master of the dimension that form of energy originated from. For example, if one wished to be able to cast bolts of pure heat energy to fire at an opponent, one could connect to the realm of Balthak. The resulting spell was called the Bolts of Balthak. The Sorcerer Supreme tended to be the one who forged the most and the strongest connections with other dimensions, thus granting the greatest power to defend the Earth with. The problem with this approach was that it led to far too many deaths for the liking of the most recent Sorcerer Supreme, which was why she locked many books which taught how to connect to the masters of other realms. Harry, however, could do it in reverse. He could sense an energy, then absorb it without needing to make contact with the masters of other dimensions. The Ancient One asked, what types of energy have you absorbed using this method? Exotic energy, dimensional energy, fire energy, sun energy, and nature energy. Harry easily listed off. Can you tell me what type of energies you sense here? You mean in this room or in you? The Ancient One raised an eyebrow and said, what exactly do you feel within me? Harry closed his eyes and concentrated. Darkness surrounded by nature, fire, ice, light, and of course pure dimensional energy. The others are synchronized with your life and soul, like Mordo and myself are with dimensional energy, but the darkness is not synchronized. In fact, the other energies seem to be arranged around it to suppress it. Harry frowned as he noticed something else. Not a presence but an absence. He said, you don't have any time energy in your body. How does that work? The Ancient One was so surprised at the last line she nearly spit up her tea. Thankfully Harry's eyes were closed so she would never have to admit to it. She asked, you can sense time energy? Harry opened his eyes and said, yes, but I'm much too weak to absorb it. So why don't you have any? Harry noticed that the Ancient One seemed reluctant to speak of it, so he added, I won't tell anyone since you're keeping my secret too. The Ancient One gave a weak smile. That was like comparing an atheist and a devil worshipper who were hiding in a holy city. Both secrets were bad, but one simply did not compare to the other. Sorcerers did not like witches and wizards, but those who had contact with the dark dimension were to be killed on sight. She herself enforced that order. However, she doubted Harry was the judging type, so there was little point in hiding something he already knew. In fact, she felt that Harry may have known since they first met. It was better to explain now than it was later once Harry had acquired certain reading materials. The reason I lack time energy is due to the influence of the dark energy you sense. I've been stealing it from the dark dimension, a place beyond time and death. She expected some disgust when she told him of her sin, and she received it. But not at the admission of her sin. Harry only looked disgusted when she mentioned that the dark dimension was beyond death. She was curious, so she asked, does that offend you, Harry? A place beyond death? Of course it does. Life has no place existing in a place beyond death. She held back her smirk that Harry's opinion seemed to match her own. Immediately she realized how odd that was, as she was almost 800 years old and Harry was 12. 12 years old children should not be so accepting of death. Then again, he did say something about dying and returning a year later. Chapter 19. Chapter 19, Secrets of the Sorcerers. Since Harry didn't react negatively to her admission, she decided to continue. The purpose of the sanctums is to protect the Earth from other dimensional threats. The Master of the Dark Dimension is one of the strongest threats. He seeks to drag the whole of the Earth into his dimension. Should he succeed, the planet will vanish from orbit around the Sun and the sky will lack both time and meaning. The dark energy will saturate the body of every living being, transforming their form while granting them endless agony. Such beings are in so much pain they cannot comprehend meaning, so are called mindless ones. They do not age and will not die naturally, but I think we can both agree that is beside the point. Harry frowned and said, "So are you going to become a mindless one?" That would kinda become an issue, he figured. She shook her head at the question. "No, Harry, at least not with the elemental formation I have, preventing the dark energy from tainting and saturating my flesh. In this way I can escape age and protect the world for as long as I can. I can also use the energy to dominate ambient dimensional energy." She demonstrated this by having the dark energy surge within her, causing a black diamond to appear on her forehead. She then waved her hand around and caused the three-dimensional space of the room they were in to expand, contract, and fold in on itself like a kaleidoscope before reverting to normal. Harry felt the dark energy within her force the dimensional energy around them to submit to her control. Harry said, "So you are using the resources of the enemy to make yourself stronger, even though doing so is much like balancing on a knife? I'm guessing you don't want anyone else to do the same." She nodded. Very few would be capable of using dark energy while restraining it. Among those of Camartage, I believe Mordo would be the only one capable of doing so. He would never do it, of course, and I cannot ask him to. Neither would he ever forgive me for doing it myself. He is too rigid. She wasn't guessing either. She had that conversation with Mordo several times, but she never saw a positive outcome when viewing it prior to the conversation, so it never actually happened from Mordo's perspective. Harry nodded. He said, "Last year I had to compete in a dangerous competition and my school wasn't allowed to help. When I asked the headmaster if I could borrow some books from his private collection, he said he could not allow me to, as that would be considered assistance. He then told me he didn't know if any books from his collection were missing and if I found any around the castle to return them when convenient. He then left me alone in the room with his collection, saying I could let myself out when I wished." The Ancient One smiled and easily recognized the act as something Albus Dumbledore would do from the rumors she heard of the man. Harry continued, "Rules exist for a reason, but reason itself does not always exist. When reason fails you, sometimes rules get in the way." The Ancient One added, "Flexibility is important. Truth is that I hate having to use energy from the dark dimension. Because as you have said, I have not synchronized with it. It feels foreign and filthy. I have lived with that sensation for hundreds of years now and I still cannot stand it." Harry felt a shiver of revulsion imagining such a thing. He said, "If there was another way to retain your life, would you use it?" The Ancient One shook her head. "It is too late. Over the years I have found a few alternatives. Each has their own price, of course, but I've found that it was no use. I once found the actual fountain of youth. I was so pleased when I found it. I was ready to completely expel the dark energy from my body and had even found a way to offset the price of continuous usage of the fountain. It was then that reality came crashing down around me. When the dark energy left my body, it was completely racked with pain. My body had existed for so long without time it could no longer survive it. No matter what I attempt, my body would die shortly after ridding myself of the energy." Harry considered the implications and realized the elixir of life would be useless in this situation as well. In a very real sense, the Ancient One's body was no longer alive. An elixir that brings life may actually make her condition worse. The Ancient One noticed Harry's frown and inwardly smiled. Harry's knowledge likely included a few ways to beat death, which was why he asked. She was happy that even knowing what she had done, he was concerned for her and even wanted to help. "Don't concern yourself with me, Harry. I have long since accepted this." Harry asked, "Is there anything I can do?" The Ancient One paused instead of immediately replying in the negative. There was in fact something Harry could give her, a piece of information that she always wanted to know but always terrified her. "Perhaps. If you can, I'd like you to answer a question. What happens when you die?" Harry considered the question. He always thought somewhere deep down he wasn't supposed to tell people things like that. However, there was no warning, no pop-up, no bad feeling when he thought about telling her the truth. In other words, the decision was entirely on him. "My death was in no way standard, but I don't mind telling you what I figured out. When you die, your soul and your sense of self, your identity as it were, must part. But the sense of self can't part unless it is well-rounded. After death you'll experience what you need to become well-rounded depending on the type of life you lived. A child who was never loved will experience a lifetime's worth of love. A person who got away with many wrongs will experience appropriate punishments to balance that person out. Once you have become well-rounded, your soul will leave your sense of self and reincarnate. The sense of self will then become one with death. I don't know what happens after that since I got the heaven package but had to return to life." Harry had long since figured out that the echoes of his mother and father he stayed so long with were both death itself. Many pieces of information they had given in retrospect wasn't information his parents would give. Like, why would his father, the heir of an ancient wizard family, tell Harry that the wizarding world was too small for him? That meant it was death all along. Harry didn't know why, but he knew that death had given him an immeasurable gift he wouldn't have traded for anything in the world. Because of this, Harry would never allow others to disrespect death. When Harry looked back to the Ancient One after finishing his monologue, he saw that she was crying. A moment later she grabbed a napkin to wipe her tears and said, "Thank you, Harry." When she heard what happened after death, she actually didn't think of herself. She thought of all the hundreds of friends, allies, and partners who died so long ago. She wasn't sure what she had been expecting for an answer, but she found that after hearing it, she felt a peace she never knew. There was however one thing that stuck out to her. She asked, "Harry, how long were you on the other side?" This wasn't the first time Harry had thought of this question. At first, he figured it was a few years, perhaps some decades. But after spending time alive in a place time could be measured, he slowly realized how wrong he had been. He blamed television and video games. He probably watched every episode of every show that existed on cable at the time at least twice and replayed every video game until he got bored with them perhaps a dozen times. "Several hundred years, I think," he answered. The Ancient One froze for a moment before a smile crept across her lips. Then she started laughing. It was a full, deep, light-hearted laugh and went on for a full minute before she eventually calmed down. Harry had dealt with Sirius enough to have patience for this kind of thing, so he calmly waited until she was done. Once calmed down, she said, "I'm sorry, Harry. It's just that many of your perceptions closely resemble my own. I thought it should be impossible for someone of my years and a 12-year-old to have so much in common. But now it makes sense. That would make you the closest person to my own age of Camartage." Harry figured if he had gone this far, he should go for broke. "Since you told me your big dangerous secret, I think I should tell you mine. Being a wizard training as a sorcerer isn't dangerous enough for you?" she asked with mirth. Harry smirked. "Nope, that was the distraction for the really good stuff. What do you know about video games?" Harry and the Ancient One spoke until morning and then late into the afternoon. Only after it had finished did the Ancient One realize it may have been the longest conversation of her lifetime. She rarely had conversations with someone she didn't already know the content of, and she had to admit finding out things you completely weren't expecting one after another was something she rarely, if ever, experienced. Harry told her all he could think of and she agreed to help him get stronger as discreetly as possible. Harry told her of his video game powers and Dumbledore's theory about the Deathly Hallows being absorbed into him. After testing out a few aspects of his powers, she made her own training schedule for him. Before this point, Harry did not understand the possibilities and benefits of the Heart Palace technique he stole from Mordo. Once the Ancient One explained it to him, he was eager to test it. Not including dark energy from the dark dimension ruled by Dormammu or time energy, there were 13 standard types of energy used by sorcerers for the most common and practical spells. Harry intended on absorbing enough of each to add to his Heart Palace and synchronize all the energies together. Harry was quite happy to know that this technique was originally created by the Sorcerer Supreme Merlin prior to his acceptance of that position to fuse exotic energy with other forms of energy. Harry's first goal was nature energy. It was used to create storms and powerful gusts of winds in a spell called Winds of Watum. The Ancient One would also take Harry to the mirror dimension once a week to spar. Watching the woman fold cityscapes like origami paper made Harry wonder if he could do something similar with transfiguration. During one sparring session, she said, "Harry, why do you use a short sword? I understand why you used it before, but you are growing taller and it is no longer a good fit for you. Sorcerers often use small weapons or long staffs in magic combat. A short sword doesn't have enough benefits to use in magic combat." The next week Harry faced her with a maniacal grin and materialized a giant sword longer than he was tall and wide enough to hide behind. The Ancient One said, "That's not quite what I had in mind." Harry's response was a wider grin. She shook her head and muttered under her breath, "Why do I even bother?" Oddly enough, the massive sword worked pretty well. It got bad if the construct broke, but Harry's constructs were pretty solid. Weapons materialized of dimensional energy didn't have weight, but they did have momentum. That meant a thick sword took more effort to swing but had more force behind the strike. Harry decided to spend the next few level ups on STR. He was ending up a jack of all trades on the stats, but since the actual power behind combat came from the path ranks, he didn't mind as long as he put the effort into grinding each out. Besides, higher STR meant higher physical resistance to damage, and Harry was more likely to get stabbed than he was to get hit with a bolt of magic lightning. With more strength and his Eldritch Heavy Sword, as the Ancient One called it, Harry had a much easier time against monsters during battle mediation. Harry also went to an internet cafe and found a video of some practitioners using a heavy sword so he could figure out some proper techniques to use with it. After Harry's third month, he finally joined the other students in open practice of dimensional energy. Mordo accepted that Harry had gotten the hang of it after 3 months and would occasionally give advice or a small demonstration. One day Mordo said it was time to spar with Harry and told him to summon a weapon. Harry smiled and summoned his heavy sword. Mordo looked both fascinated and insulted at the massive weapon. He got out his Staff of the Living Tribunal and his vaulting boots of Vaulter. Master Mordo was more than a little surprised when Harry's construct did not shatter at the first strike of the staff that could smash concrete without difficulty. Harry kept the blade moving around him while he moved around the blade. Doing so allowed him to strike out, then shield himself with the sword and strike out again. The Ancient One told him it reminded her of waves crashing on the beach. Harry decided he liked it and called the fighting style Tidal Sword style. Mordo used his boots to jump against the air, but Harry could sense the ripple of magic that preceded each step, so every use of the boots telegraphed Mordo's next move, allowing Harry to counter it before it was made. Although it looked like Harry was holding his own, that was just because of how much Mordo was holding back. He had no intention of crushing Harry, he was just looking for weaknesses in the use of his heavy sword to determine if it was worth using or not. So far he was quite surprised. Not that Harry was going all out either. Harry had already once told Mordo he was strong for his age, so Harry was using about 1.5 a standard adult's worth of strength and speed. Using dimensional energy to move your body for you increased strength and speed by a large factor, but Mordo wasn't doing it, so Harry would fight at just above human level for now. Harry would swing his giant sword to attack or move under it or behind it to defend. Harry watched a number of videos with tower shield users to incorporate how they worked around their shield to fight, and the Ancient One had no problem painfully pointing out the weaknesses of Harry's styles. Mordo had seen enough of Harry's unusual defenses, so let up and showed some openings so he could see Harry's attacks. Harry swung from the left to bisect Mordo, who jumped to dodge. The swing itself though instantly stopped below Mordo and twisted up with an edge that promised Mordo a painful landing. Mordo used his boots to take an air step, but Harry jumped to follow and swung up with the added force of the jump. Mordo once again used his boots to dodge and watch the enormous blade pass him by. Harry was both interested and annoyed by those boots. From what Harry sensed, they used electrostatic discharge to gather water vapor and solidify it for a moment to be used as a step. Volter was a godlike being who had power over clouds, which only sounded weak but really wasn't. Water vapor could be gathered into mist using Volter's power, which could conceal, blind, and even imprison others. Water could be gathered into a miniature storm cloud, which lightning could be called forth from. When Harry landed after Mordo's final dodge, the master put his staff away and said, "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Video games, Master Mordo. I play a lot of video games," Harry easily answered. The man smiled and shook his head. "I have seen spears, axes, knives, chuckrams, swords, whips, commas, and fans. That however was a first." Harry smiled and said, "So how'd I do?" Mordo nodded, promising. It seemed one word of encouragement was all the master of the mystic arts allowed himself for the 12-year-old, and Harry decided to be happy he got even that. Though he continued training each day, he still stayed in contact with the magical world. Hermione's owl Hedwig would drop off letters for him as the sanctum in London, which Harry was fine with, as he would have felt bad for the bird if she had to fly all the way to Asia every few weeks. Remus Lupin had returned to England after hearing from the papers about the tournament, and Dumbledore hired him on the spot as the new defense against the dark arts teacher. Hermione said he was great since not only was he practical, but he was actually willing to give her some advanced lessons when he saw how far ahead she was along with Neville. She also said that once a month Sirius would show up at Hogwarts and teach Lupin's classes for him, though she did not explain why. Sirius had written that Moony wanted to meet his honorary nephew when he had the time. Sirius himself had been going out on a few dates with Amelia, and they were getting closer and catching up on lost time. Seems he had already had enough of the bachelor life. Harry also kept himself up on the latest news in both business and technology. He could pretty much disassemble and assemble any tech on the market blindfolded, and could write the operating system of any computer without difficulty. He was also getting familiar with all the names of the business world, their specialties, interests, and markets. The more he read about business, the less he wanted to do with it. It was a cruel world where lives were made and destroyed by the thousands and tens of thousands on the whims and greed of those who lacked the slightest bit of compassion. Harry could put the cause of more suffering to some of these groups than he could lay at the feet of Voldemort and all his Death Eaters. But at the end of the day it was a resource, and if one day he failed to do something because he hadn't cultivated the resource when he could have, he likely wouldn't forgive himself. For his side projects Harry had already become quite the craftsman. He didn't use a forge or hammers but magic and imagination. There was a spell that could turn iron into clay and back. Harry could then mold, shape, and press the clay before stretching it to create the grain lines, then carve out the details and return it back to iron before heating and tempering it. Harry could place the finished produce in his inventory to check the details and see what worked and what didn't. Harry used the goblin techniques as a base but used his own talents and skills to build up from there. Legally, goblins were not allowed wands, and they weren't fantastic at wandless magic. Harry had their techniques and his own magic and the insights from the books of Camartage. It didn't take long for Harry to finish the library of Camartage. The apprentice section anyways. The library was split into 3 sections, the apprentice section, the master's section, and the sorcerer supreme's private collection. In order to hide this, he still borrowed 1 book every 4 days from the apprentice section, which made the librarian stop glaring at him as he thought Harry was finally reading properly instead of just skimming. Oh, the irony. The Ancient One said that once Harry had mastered the content of the apprentice section, she would grant him access into the master's section. This meant, however, that he needed to fully comprehend the whole of the apprentice section, not just have it memorized, which even for him would take a while. Harry was tempted to do it her way since he probably could within a year, but where would the fun in that be? All Harry had to do was find a specific time when the library was empty so he could sneak in. For others this would be tricky or would require breaking specific rules like the no-dimensional portals in the library rule. Harry didn't need to break those rules though, he had a better way. In Harry's room was a large painting of dogs playing poker. When Harry tapped it 3 times and said a password, it would change to a map of Camartage and show the location of everyone in the temple. Using it he could easily find a time when no one was in the library and sneak in. Harry had long since figured out the secrets to the Marauder's map and mailed it to Neville since he didn't need it afterwards. The volumes in the Master's section really was where the good stuff was. the true names of specific deities who could be invoked during spellcraft to empower some of the more esoteric spells, histories of ancient figures who did extraordinary deeds, descriptions of ancient artifacts, relics, and treasures, details about the various realms and the beings who ruled them. There really were a lot of nice things in there. 6 months after starting, Harry got a sling ring and learned to use it. The next day he returned it. From what Harry understood now, a sling ring used dimensional energy to harden space, making it brittle. When using the right technique, it was possible to overlap the brittle space with another space, then drill a hole from the brittle space behind it to the space that overlapped it. A sling ring was very important, not just for travel, but for the use of the mirror dimension. It required a lot of power to shatter space and allow one to travel into or even bring others into the mirror dimension, but that was the only requirement. Getting out, however, could not be done without a proper portal made by the sling ring. Even the Ancient One could not return from the mirror dimension without a sling ring. Harry didn't need it. The sling ring perk allowed him to harden and overlap space without the ring, and creating a portal wasn't difficult after he had the trick down. Harry created a fake sling ring so others wouldn't get suspicious though. According to the Ancient One, it was possible to make a portal to other planets, other realms, and other dimensions. The Ancient One herself showed Harry how to properly access the astral plane and even showed him the various dimensions so he could get a feeling for the energy of each. Harry could actually enter battle meditation within a dimension in the astral plane, so he was no longer limited to only terrestrial energies. There was a very specific reason the Ancient One decided to teach Harry everything she could think of. It was not free, nor was it from the good of her own heart. It wasn't to make him the next Sorcerer Supreme either. No, she had something else in mind. She knew that she was going to die before she taught everything to the one who would succeed her, and she made Harry swear to pick up where she left off. She also wanted Harry to be a backup plan in case Camartage ever fell and there was no one left. In one tutoring session, Harry asked her, "How come all the warnings for spells come after the spell in most books?" She gave an uncharacteristic shrug and answered, "These books were not written in a single sitting. Many would create a spell and test it. If they survived the test, they would write the spell down. The consequences of the spell would be learned later in the long run and written some time after the spell or ritual was first created. Can't someone just rewrite the books with the warnings first?" "No, we cannot, I'm afraid. Many books were acquired from donations and there is a strict rule against copying the book to ensure the content only rests within the originals. Another problem is that if someone did copy the books and a mistake was made, the consequences could be disastrous if the spell or ritual was performed from the incorrect copy. Such circumstances have in fact occurred more than once, which is why no one copies or edits or rewrites the books. The original volume was very important to magic users but less so to Harry. A normal sorcerer would not be able to memorize the angles and lines specific types of mandalas required for magic circles, but Harry translated those lines into arithmancy and numbers, allowing him to properly and accurately memorize even the esoteric spell circles better than if he just used eidetic memory to imprint them in his mind. His knowledge of university-level math like linear and nonlinear algebra and calculus and differential equations helped turn those lines into formulas. An average day at the temple began with waking early and having breakfast before morning practice. Harry would then spend until evening on various projects and finish in time for evening practice, where Harry would do forms with his heavy sword. Harry had no intention of actually using it against a strong enemy. It was just useful for form practice and building the right muscle groups. Harry did intend on using a large sword, but not the mammoth he swung for practice. To be honest, he just liked swinging it to see the expressions on people's faces. Caecilius and Mordo always made the best faces when they saw him. He had yet to get an expression out of Wong though. Harry was growing fond of long swords, but not something taller than he was. He had in mind something halfway between a Zanbato and a Dodeo. A long single curved clever edge type sword, a bit longer than a long sword with a wide blade and longer than normal handle for both single-handed and dual grip strikes. It was long enough to attack as he pleased, sharp enough to bisect a man or beast in one strike, yet light enough to use quickly with his strength. When the Ancient One saw Harry use it for the first time, he could tell she was relieved. Harry seemed intent to use the heavy sword only for training and pranking. Harry could easily use the tidal sword style he was coming up with on the lighter blade as well, though he had to add more forward and back steps to take advantage of the speed he could use to strike. After training, Harry would meet the Ancient One in the astral plane, where she would teach him various things and familiarize him with various planes. She could not show them all, of course. There were more planes of existence than there were people alive on Earth. But she did at least show him the important ones. During the exploration they would find some energy within Harry's range, and he would initiate battle mediation and defeat the monster that generated. In this way Harry was collecting many different forms of energy, and within a few years he had confidence to store enough to form a connection to it and synchronize with it, thus adding that energy to his spell-weaving capabilities. The lessons themselves weren't entirely one way either. Harry knew much about the relatively small hidden world of witches and wizards and would tell her about the various potions, spells, and abilities they had. She couldn't stop herself from smiling the first time Harry turned into a snowy owl. Harry even promised to add a wizard section to the library of Camartage at some point. They couldn't use exotic energy, but they could learn about it as there were other beings, both mortal and otherwise, who could use it. The list and properties of various potions was also useful, and Harry intended on leaving a means to mail order potions for the temple and some wizard gold to pay for them. He would even leave some wizard robes and directions to Diagon Alley and how to access it in case they needed to buy things directly from wizards and maybe set the sanctum up with its own account at Gringotts. Every weekend Harry would meet the Ancient One in the mirror dimension and they would spar. Although dimensional energy could be used to increase the physique, how much it could increase it by was actually determined by the strength of mind and the physique itself. A stronger mind could increase strength to the limit without harming the body. Without enough mental discipline, forcing the body too far with dimensional energy would cause damage and possibly make the body explode. However, the stronger the body, the more energy could be added without detonation. In this way, it wasn't a bad thing that Harry was increasing all his stats as his magic stats increased how much he could strengthen his body and his physical stats increased how much his body could take increasing before it broke. One time Harry tried to strengthen his body with dimensional energy beyond his limit and he ended up tearing himself to pieces and exploding in front of the Ancient One. She was most concerned until she saw his remains turn to dust and reassemble back into himself. Though she could tell from his gritted teeth how unpleasant the experience was. She was even able to hold herself back from handing out the obligatory "I told you so" as she was the one to warn him of the dangers of overexertion. That time anyways. She would not let him off without an "I told you so" if there was a next time. In this way a year passed before anything interesting happened. Harry was more surprised than anyone that it took a full year for something big to happen. Still, Harry didn't expect his first fight as a disciple of Camartage to be against someone with a kink for magic jewelry. Chapter 20. Chapter 20 Enter the Mandarin. The day started out normal enough until the temple received a certain guest. Harry wasn't able to get the full details but it seemed the guest was there to warn the Ancient One that a group of suspicious men wearing robes bearing a specific mark had been active around Mt. Woundaggery. It seemed that since their arrival, there had been earthquakes that were occurring with more and more frequency. The Ancient One gathered the masters and left for Woundaggery shortly after. Harry confirmed with his map that the library was empty and likely would remain so for a while, so this would be a great time to borrow a few texts. The first half of his plan worked. No one stopped him from entering the deepest parts of the library. It was unfortunate however that he felt someone approach less than a minute after he came in. The first thing that stood out to Harry about this new presence was not that it was unfamiliar nor that it was powerful. No, what stood out more than anything else to Harry was the intense sources of energy the presence brought into the library. Harry stood in a corner and used wizard magic to make himself invisible. There were other spells he knew that would work but since his wizard magic was undetectable and there was nothing in the library that would be harmed by the exotic energy released, it was the better choice. The man who entered wore an unfamiliar green robe with golden flames embroidered across the edges. He looked to be in his late 30s and of Asian descent along with shoulder-length black hair, well-trimmed facial hair and sharp eyebrows. On the finger of each hand was a unique ring and Harry's senses told him they were the sources of energy he felt. Not only that, they were perfectly attuned to the man himself. The library Harry was hiding in contained some of the most dangerous and esoteric knowledge in existence. The new arrival took one look around and ignored it all, venturing instead to a nondescript wall. He took out a piece of what looked to be advanced technology and activated it. Light shone from the silver disc-like object and the nondescript wall seemed to fall away and collapse in on itself. Harry paused the world and walked over to the new opening. It wasn't difficult to realize this man was an intruder. There was even a distinct chance the master's leaving was orchestrated by this man. Harry took a look at the man's rings in paused time but none were familiar to him. He also took a good look at the device which seemed capable of cracking magic locks. Harry had no idea how that could work, which was really saying something. His technical know-how may not be in the top 10 of the planet at this point but it should at least be in the top 100. And last but certainly not least, Harry inspected the newly opened space the mysterious intruder had come all the way for. He nearly fainted. Within the small space was a book on an altar. Not surprising as this was a library, but it was a book that Harry recognized. Bound in unfamiliar leather with a red dragon emblazoned on the cover. It was the Grand Grimoire. The Grand Grimoire was something as legendary as it was infamous. Centuries ago, a powerful alchemist and sorcerer found the original text of both the Greater Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon. These texts included instructions on how to summon and command almost every powerful demon in existence and contained various details on each one. Rather than use them for personal gain, he spent centuries studying it and experimenting with them and poured all the results into a single tome. The book he wrote contained not only the knowledge he gained from both manuscripts, but also knowledge he gained from demons he summoned and experimented with, along with spells and rituals he learned from other dimensions he used his knowledge to travel to. It was not the most powerful book in the universe nor the most dangerous. Oddly enough, that was what made it perhaps the most valuable. It was pretty much the most user-friendly book of all the books that could grant great power. It was no monkey's paw. It gave exact details on how to summon and control demons without error and included all the proper warnings and precautions. It built up from the knowledge of Solomon, who used demons to build his temple. At least that's what most believed. No one knew who authored it or what happened to him after all. Harry obviously couldn't let the man have it. The intruder wasn't being loaned the book for a good cause after all, he was clearly here to steal the bloody thing. When Harry realized this would likely come down to a fight, he deeply cringed. This wasn't an open field or empty plain. No, this was the master's section of the Camartage library with the Ancient One's private collection chained up on an adjacent wall. What did this mean? Well, even he couldn't repair books that had been burned to cinders. Also some of the books contained magics of their own and Harry didn't know how they would react to his wizard magic. Harry never considered that he had the option of just letting the man leave. It wasn't in his nature. The fact that he wouldn't be able to hide the evidence of the fight was also obvious. However, it was acceptable. He had been able to stay low for the last year and it was longer than he expected, to be honest. After spending as much time as he could think of coming up with various plans, Harry unpaused and said, "Excuse me, but who are you?" The man turned to face him but only showed a moment of surprise at Harry's age. He made a fist and Harry felt Chinook energy from one of the man's rings start surrounding the area. The intruder said, "Forget what you have seen and leave at once." Harry's innate mental protection prevented the mind control from having any effect, but it did answer Harry's question of how he got to the library in the first place. Luckily there was a difference between casting a spell yourself and using a tool to do it. When using a tool, you wouldn't know if the spell failed. Harry started walking further into the library to one of the doors in the back. This led him to walk right past the man who silently observed the 13-year-old child. Harry first tried an overpowered banish spell to send the intruder to the wall, but he instantly shifted his stance to endure the force and only moved back half a foot. Though Harry's spell energy couldn't be sensed, the man saw the tells of an attack beforehand and braced himself accordingly. A beam of cold and what looked to be a laser beam shot from two of the man's rings and Harry barely had time to dodge. He was relieved when he sensed they only struck a wall and not a book, but he didn't expect the gaudily dressed villain to strike first without a proper introduction monologue. Maybe he could squeeze one out of him. Harry conjured a shield and short sword with dimensional energy and said, "If you're going to check something out, I'll need to see your library card." He sneered and said back, "I shall take what I want and no child shall get in my way." He fired off a compact burst of space Harry tried to endure, but it shattered his shield like tissue paper and sent him back crashing through 3 different bookshelves and into the far wall with a crack that would shatter the bones of any mortal. At this point Harry was in a lot of pain but very grateful he had placed so many stat points into STR. Sure, that really hurt. It was like a few hundred sticks of dynamite going off in his face, but it only cost him a fraction of his health. The intruder didn't bother to check if Harry was alive and returned to the book. Though he opened the door, he didn't remove the security yet, so the book wasn't simply something he could take. He took out a few more pieces of high-end tech and he set them to work removing the spells that kept him from his prize. Harry was taking potion after potion from his inventory and gulping them down. Ping. Recovery potion has recovered health. Healing potion has increased health recovery speed by 15% for 10 minutes. Wit sharpening potion has increased int by 5% for 10 minutes. Hardening potion had increased physical defense by 20% for 5 minutes. Strengthening potion has increased STR by 5% for 10 minutes. Unfortunately, most potions could not be used with others, but Harry had these ones brewed specifically for stackable use. The downside was that they only had a shelf life of an hour after they were brewed before the effects expired, but since Harry kept them in his timeless inventory, that wasn't much of a downside. Harry quickly realized why his banishment spell didn't work. It used his magic to push his target away and was less effective the heavier the target. However, magical energy also counted towards weight. This man's 10 sources of energy were all considered massive, so pushing him was much harder. That also meant that many spells such as stunners, which don't work well on stronger opponents, would do nothing. Those energy sources were tuned to the man's life force and were practically a part of him. Energy-wise, the man's total energy was like 150 Dumbledores. Even Harry's stunner grenades wouldn't be able to put him down. Luckily his plan worked. He would have dodged that shot if it were lethal, but the result was about as ideal as he could get. He got some distance from the man and he wasn't paying attention to him. Harry observed through his energy sense the man breaking the security barriers, and Harry cast a silencing charm on his surroundings. He then opened a portal to the Sahara Desert and waited. Once the security had broken, Harry poured as much power as he could into the spell and shouted, "Oxio Grand Grimoire." The book rocketed past the man thanks to the verbal casting and made its way into Harry's hands. Faster than any Olympic sprinter, the intruder dashed at Harry, who ran into the portal he made earlier with the man following behind. The man practically growled, "Give me the book, child." Harry said, "No thanks. How about an introduction, since I hate to be rude? I'm Harry Potter, a minor practitioner of magic. I am the Mandarin, and if you value your pathetic life you shall kneel before me and surrender the book." Harry was shocked at the introduction. "The Mandarin," he cried out. The man seemed pleased at the surprise, but Harry continued and said, "You call yourself a form of dialect? How would you feel if I called myself the British?" Once he realized he was being insulted, he growled through his teeth again and made a fist that shined with magical light. Harry wasn't finished, of course. "Do you have a sidekick or rival called the Cantonese or the Hunanessa?" "Enough," he shouted and fired a stream of terrible flames Harry sensed were as hot as the sun. Harry jumped out of the way as the sand that was beneath him changed into molten glass, and Harry fired his endless cutter stream from the Mandarin's left. Instead of dodging it, he simply faded into the ethereal, allowing the spell to pass harmlessly through him. He returned to solid form and said, "You are no sorcerer. A wizard then? No matter. No one is a match for the Mandarin." Harry wanted to point out if that were true he wouldn't have come only after the Ancient One and the other masters left. As if sensing Harry's intention to say something insulting, the Mandarin preemptively fired a beam into the ground which caused the sand around them to shape itself into various mounts and obstacles and walls. This suddenly made dodging much harder. Harry fired off his slow-moving expanding cutter sphere and ran to the side. The Mandarin fired the same concussive beam he used on Harry earlier at it, which caused the sphere to detonate into a barrage of cutter spells which sliced up many of the surroundings and forced the Mandarin to seek shelter behind a wall. Harry used the moment to conjure a source of eternal flame and expanded it before granting it form. It became a semi-truck-sized dragon and sought out the Mandarin. Eternal flame was something only Harry or someone like Dumbledore could cast, but not even the latter could combine it with transfiguration magic to create something as powerful as fiend fire but not as deadly to the caster. Well, he probably could with some preparation, but definitely not on the fly. Having the power of Elder Wand strengthened magic helped. The dragon quickly found the Mandarin and sent out a blast of eternal fire dragon breath. Harry teleported behind the man and waited for an opening. With his newfound knowledge of dimensional energy, Harry was able to change the procedure for apparition into something smoother, safer, and more powerful, though he couldn't use it everywhere as it still tended to fry electronics in the area. The dragon of living eternal flame proved no challenge to the Mandarin, who fired a beam of pure cold energy which not only beat back the dragon breath but consumed and snuffed out the dragon itself. Harry used his short sword and the opening to try and slice off the Mandarin's arm, but the man's seasoned sense of battle warned him in time, and though Harry struck far faster than a normal human was capable of, the Mandarin only received a small cut on his forearm from the dimensional blade. The Mandarin quickly struck out with his fist, forcing Harry back a step, but the strike was followed through by a series of blows Harry felt were each capable of denting steel and crushing stone. Harry realized that getting close was not so great an idea, as this man was a master martial artist far beyond the level of Mordo and Caecilius. Though Harry's short sword allowed him to make the most of his speed, each of his strikes were dodged, blocked, or even parried through unarmed combat techniques. Harry missed a step while being forced back, and the Mandarin used the opening to strike Harry's chest with enough force to crack the stone skin his potion gave him. The Mandarin looked over Harry once more and said, "Impressive for a child, but you will not be saved by this. You will die for your insolence, and there is nothing that can save you." He shot a bolt of lightning which Harry's shield was able to block long enough for him to dodge the rest, but the lightning was followed up by a searing beam of light which struck Harry's shoulder. Harry conjured a dozen knives in the air with wizard magic but used some principles of dimensional constructs to create them faster. Harry then banished them all at the Mandarin, who merely smirked. A whirlwind rose up from the Mandarin and steered the knives off course. A moment later a wall of black stretched out from the Mandarin and engulfed the area in a dark energy that hid all light and energy signs, even from Harry's senses. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was coming next, and Harry jumped to the side to avoid another concussion beam which fragmented the hardened ground like an explosion. Harry threw a Patronus grenade into the air and ran to the side based on memory. He couldn't see or sense anything, but he remembered what it looked like before the Mandarin took away the light. Luckily the man didn't think Harry could do anything against his darkness, so 3 seconds after Harry tossed his grenade, the zone of dark energy was dissolved by the massive dragon of light. The Mandarin fired several beams at the dragon, but they all passed through him. Harry wished it would pretend to fight or release some of that light dragon breath as a distraction, but a Patronus would only take the initiative to fight against darkness. Harry concentrated and said, "Bombarda Maxima," firing an explosion shot at the Mandarin's feet. He noticed it just before it crashed into the ground and jumped against a nearby pillar he created earlier to get some distance from the blast. Before Harry could fire another explosion shot, the ground began to shift and form into another walled-off area. Harry turned to run away from where he sensed the Mandarin coming from, but the floor he was on suddenly cracked and he lost his footing. The Mandarin fired his beam of cold at the floor and suddenly Harry's feet were encased in ice. This game has gone on long enough. Goodbye, Harry Potter. Harry sensed the ring the man used to turn intangible charge up. Whatever he was about to do was likely his ultimate finisher. Harry could only respond, "About time." Harry grabbed the book he kept under his shirt behind his back and tossed it into the path of the beam the Mandarin had just fired. The beam struck the book and the Mandarin saw the red dragon cover, and the book itself turned to dust with a flash of bright magical light. "No." Harry used his strength to free himself of the ice and said, "I was hoping you'd have something that could destroy the book. Goodbye." Harry threw a small ball at the ground which turned into white smoke and teleported away. A bolt of lightning blasted through the smoke in the next instant which scattered it, but Harry was already gone. Harry popped a few miles from the site and paused. The only way to win was to kill that guy or destroy the book. The problem was that both were impossible for Harry. Harry didn't have a counter to the Mandarin's intangibility, and the man had more powerful magics and was far superior a martial artist. He wasn't just fighting Harry, he was seeing through him. That last combo wasn't luck. He knew where to create a spot of fragile ground to break and cause an opening. Destroying the book was just as hard. Legendary books like the Grand Grimoire couldn't be destroyed normally. If Harry had been turned to dust in that flame attack, the Grand Grimoire would simply have been lightly singed though through the heat of the sun. That last beam was different and Harry felt it. The Ancient One made sure Harry could recognize disintegration energy, as it was one of the surest one-shot kills that existed. Harry's instant death protection wouldn't protect him from disintegration. Disintegration was also something that could in fact destroy the Grand Grimoire. And that was exactly how the Mandarin had been fooled. Before grabbing the grimoire, Harry had conjured a duplicate that was as magically dense as he could make it. The moment Harry entered the portal, he placed the Grand Grimoire into his inventory and placed the copy under his shirt. The duplicate had no content in the pages, of course, but the cover looked identical. When Harry originally paused to think up his plan, he realized that if he simply tricked the man into leaving, he would likely come back. He had to think the book was destroyed, or when he tried to take it again he would bring an even greater force of destruction. His first plan was to pretend to use a spell to destroy the book himself and die in the process. Unfortunately, this plan failed the moment he put the book into his inventory and was greeted by a pop-up message. Unique item: Grand Grimoire will drop from inventory upon death. Because of this, Harry would either need the Mandarin to destroy it, or Harry would somehow have to convincingly destroy the fake himself. Since he was still paused, Harry decided to go over the pages of the Grand Grimoire. He already had it, so might as well, right? Harry spent what was likely several weeks going over the content. It was by far the most advanced book he had ever read. He memorized the characteristics of every powerful demon and how to summon, bind and command most of them. Not surprisingly, the means were all very complex, had a large probability of failure, and would likely corrupt the soul of the user. Harry had no interest in summoning demons. He found the descriptions, traits, and powers of the various demons an interesting read, and the summoning rituals themselves were insightful, but Harry would never use any of them except for reference. If nothing else, he'd be able to recognize a summoning ritual if he saw one in the future. There was, however, content which did interest Harry. The book contained magics which used dimensional energy as a base, differently from the magics of Camartage. These spells were created by beings from other worlds and contained their insights and histories. They also contained various warnings about their use, of course, but there were some instances where the spells might be useful as long as the proper precautions were made. After fully comprehending what content he could and memorizing verbatim the content he couldn't for later, Harry opened a portal back to Camartage's library. He wasn't surprised to see the Ancient One and Mordo already there. The Ancient One smiled seeing Harry and said, "You look to have seen better days, Harry." Harry looked down and only then noticed a part of his robes were burned and there was a black burn on his shoulder where the laser struck. Harry shook his head and said, "I'll live." Mordo practically yelled, "What happened here? Who did this?" Harry said, "He called himself the Mandarin. Came for the book over there. The leather one with a red dragon on the cover." Harry saw Mordo soundlessly mouth the words Grand Grimoire, while beginning to look pale. The Ancient One noticed Harry's lack of panic and after considering the circumstances and knowing the possibility of Harry not knowing what that book was to be, understood the situation was already resolved. Before she could say anything, Mordo shouted, "What happened? Where did the Mandarin go?" Harry realized that they both recognized the name, so Harry said, "I tricked him into firing a disintegration beam of some kind at the book and escaped." The Ancient One's eyes widened only for a moment in surprise, but Mordo was not nearly as subtle. His jaw was hanging neatly from his mouth. The Ancient One said, "Harry looks like he could use some healing. Follow me." The Ancient One was fully aware that Harry did not in fact need healing, but Mordo didn't need to know that and she was curious for the details. She did not see this event coming, perhaps because Harry was involved, but as it turned out, well, she didn't mind it. The pair made their way to the Ancient One's room and Harry pulled out a tea set for them from his inventory. Exquisite tea takes more than a few minutes to brew and loses quality quickly, but a timeless inventory allowed him to have some whenever he wanted, and it was already as good as the Ancient One's. One of her secret uses of the Eye of Agamotto was to see when she would need tea to be ready so she could prepare it in advance. This was why her ready-made tea was better than most people had in their lives. The Ancient One took the cup Harry poured for her and said, "Thank you, Harry. Now please go over what happened today." Harry gave her the details, not bothering to hide that he was sneaking into the master's library or his map. He was pretty sure she knew and Harry hadn't touched her private collection. As of yet anyways. He told her of the items the Mandarin used to break the security and Harry's plan. He also told her the details of the battle and that the book was in his inventory. She finished her second cup of tea by this point and said, "And it's safe to assume you've memorized the contents." Harry nodded. "Mostly for reference. I wouldn't be surprised if I encounter a demon at some point, so those details will be helpful. The requirements for commanding demons though are not something I can ever do though, so no demon army for me." "Oh, and why is that?" Harry frowned. "You haven't read it." She shook her head. "Many of the restricted tomes or the ones in my private collection were placed there to prevent the temptation the knowledge offers. I have succumbed to temptation before, so I am not willing to risk it again." Harry realized that this meant many of the books in her own collection may have content she was unaware of. There are several ways of commanding a demon without staining or selling your own soul, but they all require risks which have the potential to harm countless others or materials which I am not willing to use, such as the pure souls of others. Solomon, for example, was said to use a signet ring to command demons that was gifted to him by God, but the truth was that he was an alchemist and crafted the ring himself. Harry left the rest unsaid but implied. If the Ancient One was surprised, she did not show it. Solomon once held the title of Sorcerer Supreme, but that title simply means the holder must be powerful enough to defend the earth. It doesn't mean the holder has to be good.